I just showed up. We have a quorum. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Let's go straight into the agenda. So item number 1 is the approval of the minutes from last month's meeting. Motion. Second. Anybody have any comments, corrections, edits? All those in favor of approval? Right. Item number 2, public comments. We do have I have 4 speaker slips. It appears that 3 of them are related to the agenda item number 7. We'll hold off on those, and then have Catherine Rhodes, non-agenda item.
Hello, Catherine Rhodes. I'm a civil engineer here in San Diego, and I have a handout for you here for the iTalk board. And what this is my my public comments to item 11, the first Transnet 10-year comprehensive review program. And my issue is that in the city of San Diego, what I say is that they hoard cash, specifically Transnet cash. And you guys have this board policy 31, Rule 17, Section 4, local agency balance limitations, where you're supposed to only have 30% maximum of your annual revenue in fund balances. And the city of San Diego actually has 100% in fund balances. And so one of the, and I know before they even had higher fund balances. It's gone down, which is great. Used to be, I'd say, 300%. Now it's down to 100%. But it's really supposed to be 30% maximum. And so what I'm asking you guys, if you could, look at my paper and tell me is, right now, the fund balance, according to the city of San Diego, is different from the fund balances that you at SANDAG have in your reports. And you can see it here. And what I did is on the 3rd page of the report here is a table right here. And basically what it says is, the fund balance is going to be $30.6 million. And with your revenues, you're only allowed to have $9.75 million max, theoretically, in your fund balance.
What page, I'm sorry?
It's this page right here. It says page 6 of the city of San Diego.
Page 6?
It's the 4th page in from your file.
What's the 4th?
It says 6 but it's 4.
So what it is the numbers that the city of San Diego puts out are different from the numbers that SANDAG staff puts out. And also one of the parts of the SANDAG ordinance back in the day, that they actually have to say that they're meeting everything. And so further on here, you'll be able to see that they're actually saying that on the CB adjustment request, they're saying that that they're basically in compliance with that rule, and I don't believe they're in compliance with the rule. And so what I'd like you to do is to just look at my stuff. My other issue is with the city of not being able to track Transnet projects at the city of San Diego by looking at the paperwork that I attached here. And so what I recommend is that you actually force the city of San Diego to use for Transnet funds for CIP projects, that you actually have them use your template so that we could see the money going in and the money going out. Because right now, everybody's hoarding these funds. And what I wanted to show is that there's, I believe, an additional $20 million that in theory should be encumbered as soon as possible. And that's what I'm looking for, all the numbers to match and consistency between the city and SANDAG. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments that don't have support?
Is there, do we need to address that at all with the staff? Or
We can. I would think we'd be able to put this on a future agenda should we wish to have staff expand upon it, but it's a non-agenda item. So.
Yeah, I just wondered if there's
Is there a desire to have them staff?
Yeah, if there's any comments now, or should we just, like the chair said, should we just?
Yeah, so one of the items at your next meeting is the draft fiscal audit, so it may be, a good opportunity for us to.
Okay.
I'm supportive of putting this on the agenda for our next meeting, and appreciate reading your perception of the problem. We've been focusing on this problem for quite a while, and
It's so much better.
you have different insights. We need to absorb those and see whether they're correct or not, and if correct, we need to revise our approach to monitoring.
Any member comments? I know Ariana has a few comments that she's going to add. Or at least one, excuse me.
Oh, it was really a follow-up from your last, I was going to cover it as part of the performance audit item.
Oh, as part, okay.
Or I could cover it now, but yeah.
No,
Performance
we made
audit
performance
item, it's
item.
related to that, so, okay.
That item 2's done. 3, 4, and 5 are all on our consent calendar. One of them is a recommendation. Does anybody have any issues with
Yes,
these
I'd
all
like
consent?
to discuss number 3.
Okay.
Is there that? Or do you want to approve the other stuff?
Well, we do have City of San Diego and the Mesa staff here for item number 4, if you would like to hear information from them.
I just have a question, quick question with the file.
Okay. Why don't we go one by one? Number 3.
Yeah, and I was just wanted to understand a little further of why the LA index was selected amongst the other ones that were available to use to reset the local tax rate. And particularly because the narrative discusses the other two, which were, and one of them, I think, is the state, the Transnet one, is order of magnitude different. Order of magnitude different.
That's true.
And while it's discussed, the plot only shows the one, and it doesn't show the other, if you look at them all.
Yeah, the other two, with this, what we were trying to show on that plot was how closely the LA one and the RTCIP fee, how the RTCIP fee has now fallen behind where the LA ENRCCI is. We chose the LA ENRCCI because we felt it most closely, it was the city that most closely represented costs here in San Diego, in Southern California. So that was our.
Do we understand that the derivations of the Transnet, the Caltrans index and the LA index, the disparity is huge?
The disparity is huge, and the derivation of the Caltrans.
Transnet, I mean, our Caltrans, I'm wondering whether we're once again robbing the future to mitigate the impact.
I see what you're saying. The Caltrans CCI does jump around a great deal. It's far, far more volatile than the LA ENRCCI or the national ENRCCI. And the reason we chose, and the weakness we felt in the LA one was not that it jumps around, but the reason that it jumps around is it's based on bids that Caltrans receives for projects. And the amount that it can jump around really is influenced by the type of projects that's being bid. And it tends to be a smaller number, a smaller sample size than the LA ENRCCI in terms of, I mean, there are a lot of projects, but versus the LA ENRCCI, which takes a look at the components, the cost components for these, for many materials and costs. It takes a much broader view throughout LA. So we felt that the Caltrans CCI just jumped around too much to make it
One is managing cost inputs, the other is managing monitoring bid prices.
Exactly.
I can support this on a condition that next month, can we get this chart to show how we track cumulatively against all the indices that you...
Sure. I actually prepared that, but again, because it didn't seem to, it kind of, the LA, the Caltrans one jumped around so much that it really made the scale of the...
I understand, but what I'd be interested in is on a cumulative basis,
Yeah,
independent
sure.
of the volatility,
Yeah.
on a cumulative, where are we, ahead, behind the
Yeah,
Caltrans?
for the LA, let's see, Caltrans CCI has jumped about 50%, whereas the LA ENRCCI has jumped about 22%, and the national ENRCCI has jumped about 28%.
Is it fair to say that the ENR is kind of like all construction types versus the Caltrans is probably more concrete, steel, asphalt, and
Yeah, the Caltrans CCI
so
is
it's a
made
much subset of the types of
It is a
construction?
smaller subset of types of, and it's made up of six different subsets. There's asphalt, concrete, structural steel, rebar, excavation, and one other I forget. Whereas the LA, ENR, CCI is much more, is a broader range, as you suggest.
It would include vertical construction and other things.
It would. One of the issues that we had, again, with the Caltrans CCI, its volatility, we hit it at a low point. We came in with this fee in 2008, 2009. We kind of hit that at a low point. And one of the reasons it's risen over 50% since then is because it had fallen from its 2000.
Cumulatively, that washes out.
Well, cumulatively, it would wash out if we had started at a different point. But because of when this fee came into being in 2008, we were at a really low ebb in the Caltrans CCI because of its volatility. So we ended up, in the last 10 years, we have a very steep curve. Whereas if you looked at a longer trend of the Caltrans CCI, it'd be a lot flatter.
I'm concerned, Tyler, when you raise it. This relates to housing fees and everything.
Right.
The underlying reason is the transportation requirements from that housing, if I'm understanding it.
But we,
Well, it should be the other index you're talking about that doesn't have high-rise construction. It has pure
Or
transportation
housing.
control.
Yeah, I guess I was just, I'm not sure the background of, how this was set forth in the ordinance in terms of what we're supposed to base it on. I guess it was.
yeah, the ordinance does mention the ENR CCI or a similar CCI.
Provide some
And
flexibility.
and it does constrain us also, and it doesn't allow us to go higher than the ENR CCI, but it also doesn't allow us to go lower than the 2% increase.
You're not allowed to go higher than this, so you couldn't, the Caltrans would be higher than at the beginning.
Well, it does allow us a little bit of wiggle room when it says an ENR, LAE, well, not, it doesn't specify LA, but it does say engineering use record construction cost index or a similar index. So,
Again, we do this every year?
Every year.
Every year. I have no problem going forward here, but before we do this another year, and particularly while it's fresh on the mind next month, we can revisit this. But my concern is if we're using too low of an index, we're having growth in population, housing, and everything, and we're deferring to the future the cost of transportation that's going to be necessified that because we're not charging enough for development fees.
sure. I can provide you, I can give you the chart if you want. I've
I guess
prepared it, just didn't put it in the report.
My thing was just that why I was trying to differentiate because my understanding was, and I'm reading this now, is that it's set forth in the ordinance that it's be no less than 2%, but the CCI published by ENR or similar, and I'm not sure that the Caltrans is similar because of the types of things it's monitoring.
I think you should speak to the underlying point Kai is raising. What is the purpose of this fee? I don't know what it is. The purpose, as I think it is for transportation, and we ought to be using an index that mostly reflects transportation costs, not high-rise construction.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, but again, the volatility of the Caltrans construction index is what gives us pause.
So we're using like less than ENR. Anyway, okay, that's that.
Item number 3. Item number 4 is the Smart Growth Incentive Program Agri Transportation Grant. It's a request for extension by both the City of San Diego and they said, do you have any desire to hear from them or any reason it's been down consent?
Is this the one we've already talked about a couple times, or is this a different one? Was it regarding the seniors and transporting them? Or
That's the next.
That's the next.
Later on in the
Okay.
agenda, rather, number 7.
The only question I had is what are the real alternatives to the delays that are recommended? Are there any alternatives?
Specifically to item number 4?
I mean, when you're half pregnant, yeah, what's the alternative? We'd make a big thing that we're approving this recommendation to delay. Against what? What else could we do?
Well, if the amendment was not approved, then those monies could be rolled over into the next cycle. That's one option.
Okay.
And maybe in the future, when we have the recommendations to delay, would clearly state if we don't, what happens.
Yeah, I reread it online. I did want to make a comment, though. This is a great report this time around. And I was at the, Stuart was there and Dick was there at the board retreat last week, and they did a video on the 2017 accomplishments for the projects that were completed or under construction. And a lot of these are on there, and it's a great how many minutes? It was an 18-minute video that I think some of the board members wanted to see it shorter. But I don't know if you'd like to see it here next time, but it was incredible. No, the number 5, yes, number 5. Did I say 4?
We're
I
at
have-
number 4.
Oh,
No, we're script 5.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to make a comment that the video is incredible, and Sandy doing a great job getting projects out.
You can find it on YouTube.
Okay.
Video.
YouTube. So then, I would need a motion for the consent items.
I move to approve the consent item.
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Welcome, Caitlin and Stuart.
Thank you.
We are on item number 6, which is Ariana's update. And thank you, City of San Diego and La Mesa staff that are here. Sorry, I'm not listening to you right now.
Okay, so since your January meeting, the Transportation Committee reviewed the Senior Mini Grant Cycle 10 call for projects that's on your agenda today, and staff will be sharing the comments received during that meeting with you as part of that item. The board discussed the 10-year review look-back report that was presented at your last meeting in January. We included the ITALC comment letter that you prepared as part of that report to the board. And we received additional comments from the board and policy advisory committee members that were generally consistent with the future considerations that were included as part of that report. And we're going to use all of those to inform the look ahead portion of the 10-year review, and we're scheduled to return to the Regional Planning Committee and the Transportation Committee at their March 2nd meetings, where we're going to go ahead and kick off the look ahead portion of the review, and we're going to be discussing the implementation of the feedback and comments that were received as part of that presentation. The board held a number of community engagement activities for the executive director recruitment. The job opening is going to be posted later this week, and by mid-March it's anticipated that the screening interviews are going to be conducted. A recruitment subcommittee will interview shortlisted candidates, and then interviews and the selection of the new executive director is anticipated to occur at the April 27th board meeting. And then finally, the board held its annual retreat last week, as our committee member mentioned, and a few of our ITAC members did attend that event.
The question, was there any reaction from the board to our letter related to the look back?
Yes, absolutely. There were some comments, and so the plan is to come back to future meetings to address those and kind of set out an implementation plan and near-term steps and kind of a timeline for and get additional feedback.
Any other? Thank you very much. Item number 7 is the Senior Mini Grant Program amendment request, and Jack is here with City of Coronado staff.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Jack Christensen, and I'm the Grants Administrator here for the Specialized Transportation Grant Program. As promised last month, I'm here to discuss the City of Coronado Senior Mini Grant Project. As stated in item number 7, the City of Coronado was awarded $88,000 on February 27, 2015 by the Board of Directors during the Cycle 8 call for projects. The Senior Mini Grant was awarded to the city so that it could implement a new program called Coronado Seniors Out and About. This program provides Coronado seniors with transportation to shopping, medical appointments, recreational services, and to the new Senior and Community Center, John D. Spreckle Center in Bowling Green. This program offers curb-to-curb, door-to-door, and door-through-door transportation services designed to allow Coronado seniors to age in place. After the start date of the project, city staff began developing the first of its kind project in the city of Coronado. This consisted of marketing, hiring staff, conducting outreach, and more. During this time, no transportation services were provided. Initially, the city of Coronado proposed to provide 16,560 trips to seniors at a cost per trip of $6.64. Once the program was fully developed and started working toward program performance indicators, the city realized those proposed numbers could not be achieved and requested a change to the performance indicators within their scope of work. Given that these funds were competitively distributed, SANDAG grant program staff began assessing the request immediately. The requested performance indicators and schedule were assessed to determine how the requested numbers would have affected the quantitative scores the city received had the requested performance indicators be evaluated originally. SANDAG staff determined that the requested numbers would have received the same scores. SANDAG grant program staff reached out to the SANDAG technical services team for a review of those numbers. It was determined again that the quantitative scores would have remained the same. It is worth noting that the city of Coronado received the highest score for their senior mini grant application during the Cycle 8 application process. The requested performance indicators also come with an extended project schedule. Based on data from progress reports submitted by the city, SANDAG estimates the project will take an additional 20 months to meet its objectives. The city of Coronado has projected that it will need an 18-month extension to meet those objectives by using its own data, which includes the project's anticipated growth. However, the SANDAG staff recommendation is to amend the project schedule 12 months to allow the project to operate under the requested performance indicators and return to this committee and the Transportation Committee to weigh in again on the project if another time extension is requested by the city. Therefore, now that the project is fully operational, SANDAG staff recommendation is to amend the performance indicators as requested by the city and extend the project schedule 12 months. SANDAG staff welcomes feedback and input on how to best move forward with this project, and this concludes my report, and I invite you to ask any questions you may have.
Let me just, so I can clarify, we have 3 speakers from Coronado, 2 from the senior out-and-out program, and 1 from the city. Do they want to? Oh, the speakers are just here to address questions?
Yes, they can ask questions, any questions the committee has.
They don't have anything they want to present to us at this point in time?
No full report, no.
I have a question. Based on what I read, it seems like this project, by any commercial standard, would be deemed to be epitome of a failure.
It had its challenges, yes.
And I'm concerned if we establish a precedent that you can propose, quote, anything, win the award, and fail. And I emphasize that word because that's what the data shows. I don't know anything more than what I've heard. And I have serious concern that if we say, well, okay, fail, take a lot more time, and don't deliver but I forget the numbers, a quarter of the product that you promised. It's hard for me to justify that. I'd say, in the real world, you failed, you haven't done it. If there's any remaining funds here, recycle them. And the idea that they would have scored had they, I don't want to use the word honest, had they been more accurate in their forecast, they would have won the proposal anyway. That begs the issue a little bit. I mean, if I understand that this is our policy here, when I propose to you, I'll tell you I'll give you the most optimistic thing in the world. Because when I failed, okay, that's mea culpa, and you give me the extension, let me reduce the product. It doesn't matter, I got my money. I'm serious concern about this. I don't know if my colleagues would share those concerns. This didn't miss by a little, this missed big time.
It says since July 1st, 2016, 1,000 trips at the cost of $26.45 per trip. And then later on that in October 2017 through December 17th, the program has experienced the following increases. And those are large increases, but is this 1,000 trips part of that in that time frame?
Yeah. I'll explain the 1,000 trips. So that cost comes during the months, if you total their project costs for the months that they were actually providing those trips, it comes in at that $26. However, if you do include those significant startup costs, their cumulative cost per trip goes to $39.25. So it's really reflective, that cost per trip is really reflective of the time that they were operational and providing trips.
And then the increase from October to December, is that because it was a holiday season and folks are shopping downtown? And all? Why such an increase in those 3 months?
Are you referring to the number that's in their letter?
No, second last paragraph on Wendy's letter.
You know,
I'm just curious, it looks like a great increase, but it looks like
I can't speak to the methodology of how that figure was calculated, but I can tell you that each month over the last few months, their number of one-way passenger trips has increased. So I wouldn't say that is untrue. In fact, in December, they provided the most trips they've ever provided.
So how do you anticipate the city trying to increase these numbers? Through marketing, through word of mouth? I mean, how is it?
Yeah, I would ask that the project come up and speak to that. I do know that there have been very heavy, they have been heavy on the outreach kind of aspect regarding their program. So maybe I have Roger Miller here, who's the Director of Recreational Services, and then Wendy Garrison, who's the Project Director.
And the question was, how do we account for the increase?
Well, I'm just curious. It's 1,000 since April 1st, but yet in 2016, but yet in October, the 3 months, those numbers were huge increases. And then, so I'm just curious, if you're asking for this, how are you anticipating getting these numbers up to make the cost go down per trip?
Sure, so already we're experiencing great increases. At the time that this program rolled out, you probably heard a lot on the news about Uber and Lyft and problems with people getting arrested essentially with Uber and Lyft because of taking advantage of customers. So in the first 6 months of this program, City of Coronado never had anything even remotely like this. We're a transportation deficit city. So it took us a while to gain trust. That wasn't something that we anticipated. We thought if we roll out a volunteer driver program, people will just sign up and boom, rides will get going. It doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, there was all that news about unfortunate things happening, so it took a while to build the trust in the community. Once we built the trust in the community, we have exponentially increased the number of riders in the program every single month since. We're about 155 riders in our program now. So the first 6 months of the program were slower than we anticipated it being, but since then, in that 3-month period, you can see that we've had some substantial growth. We had 48% increase in unique ridership. That's unique individuals utilizing the program. We had a 24% increase in volunteer driver hours. We had a 34% increase in the number of rides provided monthly, and we anticipate that that will continue to increase.
And then just again, how do you get the word out? How's that work
So,
if you live in Coronado and you want to take advantage of this?
That's a great question, because part of what I don't think that we anticipated was when people are isolated in their homes in a community such as Coronado, there's only 2 ways to get on and off the island. Both of them involve a freeway. As you age, there are a lot of people that aren't comfortable driving on a freeway anymore, particularly over a very high bridge. That can be disconcerting to some folks. So I'm sorry, I lost track of your question there.
Just how do you anticipate trying to get your
Okay,
ridership
thank you.
up?
So part of what we're realizing is how many people are isolated in their homes and they have no contacts. So we went out to all the community groups and started speaking and giving outreach and opportunities, passing out flyers, working with our police department for any home calls they might receive, our fire department. And then we realized there was still a pretty substantial group of people that stayed in their home and didn't get out. So how do you reach those people? So part of what we've done is we've now created in-house our own video using our marketing team, and we're showing that on the local cable channel as well as through city council meetings that are also filmed. So we're now reaching more people, which I believe is showing in our increase in numbers in both rides and ridership.
Thank you.
I've got 3 questions, but I want to preface by saying, please don't anybody interpret the questions as in any way suggesting that these aren't valuable services that we should find ways to provide. I lean a little bit towards where Dick is coming from, that the provision should be done as, I guess, efficiently, as effective as possible. So my 3 questions are, one, which is probably not as relevant for you, it's just curious to me that the MTS Access program, which doesn't even provide equivalent services, is at a cost of near $10 per ride higher. And I guess that might invite a deeper discussion as to how the cost per ride is calculated and what kind of allocations there are that lead to that number. But more to the point, I wonder if MTS access is a relevant comparison as opposed to other local providers of this type of service. And you know better than I, but maybe you could respond to the question as to whether MTS access itself is the best comparison as opposed to other, what I would characterize as analogous service providers.
So MTS created law. They have to work within 3/4 of a mile of a fixed route. So, and there are seniors in Coronado who probably live outside of that 3/4 of a mile area where MTS access can serve them. I would say MTS, that model is not the best comparison to a volunteer driver project, mostly because the services are not 100% comparable. The door-through-door, sometimes these volunteer driver programs have volunteers who will bring them, you know, to a shopping center. They'll help unload the groceries, bring them in the house. It's more of a customized service. I did just check the TDA cost per trip for MTS, and it's around $39.25. So it is a little bit higher than what this project is. It's a little bit higher than what their cost per trip is for this project. So MTS maybe not the best comparative project, but it is a project that's eligible for some of these individuals in the area.
Right. Yeah. So I see what you're saying. So you looked at that because they potentially could have been another service provider in Coronado. I guess where I was coming from is, at least for me, looking at the numbers, the context that would make more sense for the numbers is to look at some of the other jurisdictions, perhaps, that do this type of service, and to give context as to whether 26 is more typical. But let me get to the last point, which is that, at least in my tenure here, this kind of concept that it takes a long time to get the startup going and that the initial results tend to be disappointing, and so we need to give it more time, a little bit analogous to what Dick was saying. It seems fairly common with this program, and the only thing I would say is, recognizing that these are important services, going back to the point I made at the last meeting, I would just suggest that perhaps as part of the 10-year review and rethinking things about go forward, maybe the board, in the context of looking at the ordinance itself, consider whether there are alternative ways to provide these kinds of services, because this isn't the first time I've heard the concept that the startup period had lots of issues, lots of delays, et cetera, et cetera. And there are people out there who need these services, so I would hope that the board and staff would be open-minded as to think about whether this approach actually is the most effective approach.
Yeah, and we actually are looking for that input on item number 10. So we're going to have a presentation about the next competitive cycle that's coming up, so any feedback would be well received.
If I may, I'd like to address the startup, because I know there's some questions there, and they're legitimate questions. So I'm Roger Miller. I'm the Director of Recreation and Golf Services for the City of Coronado. So effectively, we had no building to speak of. We had a building that was run by an association. The city determined that we were going to demolish that building, and the city was actually going to take over and build a new facility and develop a program, which was a rider program. I will also tell you that there was no infrastructure as far as staff in order to put this program forward. So when we were awarded the grant, we had to, at that point, develop a staff, or in the process of developing a staff, to actually put the program in motion. At the same time, we had no facility or building in which to house this program. So over the course of about a year and a half, construction of the program, or construction of the building, went forward. We brought on staff, and we actually did have to develop this from a ground zero premise. We had no volunteers. We had no legal determination on any of the forms that we were putting forward through the city. We had, again, no staff, no computer system, no software system. All of these systems had to be put in place. Over the course of the year and a half, when we put these systems in place, we got the system up and rolling. Wendy came on board, at some point during that process, took over the program. Her her full focus is not just doing the program, but it's also helping develop the new senior center because it was run by an association and now it's run by city staff. So this is all kind of a balancing act. And of course, being a small city, we do task all of our employees with multitasking. They have a lot to do. They're not just assigned one task. So Wendy's job is not just solely handling, you know, the out and about program. It's actually handling a lot of other issues within our senior community. So that is really the premise or the background for the program taking some time to develop. Legal, construction, building, computer systems, all of these things were all built from scratch. And we appreciate that. We really had no program whatsoever when we were awarded the funds. I hope that answers your questions. Sure.
My name is Barry Grovey, and I'm a volunteer driver for Coronado Seniors Out and About. Fortunately, at 69, I can still be the driver. And who knows in 10 years. But I've been driving for the program. I was among the first drivers. And a question came up a while ago about the increase in the numbers from October, I think it was, during something like a holiday period, and were they shopping? I can tell you I drive a lot, and my riders are going to have chemotherapy, having radiation treatments. We don't have the services in Coronado for specialty medical. We have Little Sharp Hospital, but we don't have specialty medical, and so I am driving people to La Jolla and out to East County and Chula Vista to get the kinds of medical services that they need. And that has increased since the program started to really kick in. The numbers of medical appointments, physical therapies, treatments that our riders are getting has really increased. Not much shopping at all. The folks in our program are really not capable of shopping, for the most part. And that brings me to the other comment about the mass transit. It doesn't work in Coronado. I don't know how many of you are really familiar with Coronado, but we have something called alley houses in Coronado. They're little tiny houses, 400 square feet to possibly 1,000 square feet at most, that are behind the big houses that most tourists see. And that's where some of our riders live in isolation now. They've owned them for 30, 40 years, 50 years. They're alone. Their families are gone. Their friends have passed on. And they, most of them are in walkers or canes or something, but they cannot walk distance to a bus stop. And so our service is now picking them up in a way that they're saying, I don't know what I would do without you guys, you know, because they can't get someplace. Uber, Lyft, taxis, they can't afford that. I know people think Coronadans are very rich, but the people I'm talking about are not at all. They barely can live in those small houses that they live in. So we think that that's why we're building, because we're reaching those folks who are isolated, and maybe they're staying home watching TV. And some of them have told me that they would not seek the medical help they know they need if it weren't for us, because they can't get there.
I think I'd like, thank you for the clarification on that. I think on that note, I'd like to recommend that we grant the request. What's interesting is that the Board of Directors approved this in February 2015, but yet I guess there were a lot of initial things that had to be done before this program could even get started. So I'm just curious, was that planned at all as far as, did Sandag know that it was going to take that quite a bit of time to get the infrastructure set up before you could get folks to?
I will tell you that I replaced a prior director, and I can't speak to her philosophy when she applied for the initial grant, but the initial grant requires a scoring system. And so, you know, you're trying to put together a program and score well so that you can initiate that program. And not having any sort of background or understanding or anything to really work off of, you're really kind of shooting blind, basically. And so you're putting together projections and numbers to try to successfully get the grant, with the idea that at the same time we're going to bring on board a new center. We're going to develop this program. And I will tell you, we encountered some construction delays, as that always seems to happen, and different hurdles that you have to go through. But we are at that point now where we have a functioning center, we have a staff, and we're really moving forward on this as fast as we can. And I think we've been, to be honest, I think from our perspective, we've worked very, very hard on this. And we've put together a lot of work, a lot of effort, and we think it's a successful program based on where we have come from.
If I might just add one thing. The original cost per trip was $6.64. We take 25-mile rides one way into San Diego County to provide people the opportunity to get to medical appointments outside of the city of Coronado. If you take simply the mileage reimbursement at the IRS rate at 25 miles, that's $13.63. I didn't write the grant, so unfortunately I don't have any of the notes of the methodology used to provide it. So if you can imagine getting a grant and no one who wrote it is with the city any longer, so we're trying to backtrack and figure out the methodology. I'm not sure how they came up with the numbers, but I'll tell you, I don't know how we can provide a $6.64 per trip when just the mileage reimbursement alone, if we didn't have a single staff, software, volunteer trainings, if we had nothing else, would be $13.63 per trip.
Kim has a comment and then Dick has a comment.
Yeah, I guess to respond to some of the ITOP members' comments, I think, Stuart, you do raise a good point. On one thing, I think we're not bringing the criteria right now, but I do think on item 10 we should have some of this discussion, because we do have other volunteer driver programs around the region that these grant programs are funded, and it's true everyone has to kind of learn and build that same base of knowledge, and then once they get going, I think they're fairly successful. It's a fairly, very customized service that provides really high customer focus sort of services for seniors versus your typical access or paratransit service. But we're sort of limited with regard to the fact that these must be awarded competitively. But maybe there's a chance for us to take a look at it a different way, because you could actually maybe put RFPs out for these kinds of services and maybe group them in areas that you might have efficiencies of scale. So I mean, that's definitely something we can look at going forward. In terms of just any new program, including public transit, even when we do a new service, and the MTS operators at NCT know how to run bus and rail service, anytime we do a new route, there are typically 1 to 3 year kind of ramp up where the program is getting. So I don't think it's unusual that you have a brand new service. I do think, given the infrastructure staffing otherwise weren't in place, it may behoove us as we look at the criteria for the next round of projects, that's something we vet in advance. Because had that been in place, I do think your cost for services probably would be a lot lower, because that would have been all some cost that the city had already invested in, and so we wouldn't have been paying for some of that startup cost maybe as quite as deeply. So that's something, as we get into the criteria, we definitely can look at, capacity and capability among the existing systems in place at the local jurisdiction in nonprofit.
Yeah, I just want to reaffirm what Stuart said. My questions regarding this issue absolutely in no way are questioning the meritorious objectives of the program. I strongly commend you for your volunteerism to make these kind of programs work. My concern is strictly one of process. I mean, a 400% increase in costs that are being secret through my private sector experience. You just can't philosophically tolerate that. Simple as that.
I really commend the program as well. I'm curious, along the lines of grouping or something, some other looking at improving things. I was curious, with a program like this that relies on volunteers, are you able to get to a point, are you at a point where somebody that needs medical, transportation, everything can count on the program, or is it subject to availability? And does that play into whether we look at other alternatives and things? I guess.
If you look at it, we serve on the San Diego Volunteer Drivers Coalition. We're one of their members. And if you look at every single program offered out there, yes, it does based on availability. We have a success rate of 90% of our rides being completed that are entered in the system on average. Now, we have had a week or two, particularly when the flu season went around, that both riders and drivers were canceling at 4 to 5 rides per day, which was a significant impact to the program. We don't get any credit for rides that are not completed, but we're booked and assigned, and but something unfortunate like that happens. But we do have a 90% success rate in rides being picked up. Majority of our drivers do pick up rides that are medical first and foremost before the other rides. However, the social aspect is also a really important aspect. If you look at chronic health and disease here in San Diego County and look at the numbers, getting out and being social is sometimes equally as important depending the person. But we are providing a number of rides. We have 23 vetted drivers right now, which is significant. If you look at any other volunteer driver program at the 9-month period, especially for a community of our size, which is very small, even much larger communities don't have that many volunteer drivers in their program, and we still have 2 or 3 in the wings right now. We're recruiting every single month. So our goal absolutely is to try to get to 100% ridership. Some days you have 20 rides and 23 volunteer drivers, so you're trying to figure out how to make all that work together. But we're very, very fortunate that we have such a committed volunteer community that is willing to pick up the rides to provide those services for those folks.
And can I say from the perspective of a driver, with our program, because we can look at the rides that are needed on our own computers at home, we're constantly monitoring that, and the staff will send out an email saying, this week we have this many rides and this many are covered, and there are a few that haven't been, and we all look at that. And if we see something that's a medical appointment or something like that, with 23 of us, somebody is going to rearrange their schedule and pick up the few that are left over in that week to make sure that those are covered. And we talk to the drivers, we talk to each other, we're all friends, and we know we're going to do that. So yes, once in a while something does slip.
And I just want to say really quick, thank you for including us. I understand that in a small city like Coronado, it's difficult to compete with large cities like San Diego that have much more population density. But we are definitely providing, the funds from this are definitely providing a quality service. We have a rider in particular, one of the first ones that ever called in, that needed respiratory therapy in La Jolla. If she didn't have respiratory therapy once per week, she wasn't going to breathe. And this is the only option for her to be able to get to those services. And so it's definitely making a huge impact on the lives of our community to be able to age in place where they've born and raised, lived in houses, many generations sometimes. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and speak about the grant funds and the program.
How much of the program is funded by the SANDAG money versus the city of Coronado?
So the city of Coronado is required by the grant to have at least a 20% match. Right now in our reports, I believe we're at 38% match, and that does not include any of my time associated with the grant. I actually oversee all of it. If you included that, we'd have a significant increase in that, but just based on the reports alone, we're about around the 35-38% mark in match.
I was going to say, it seems like sort of the bottom line with this program is there aren't really great alternatives. And so, my issue is more what I characterize as sort of an item 10 issue than an issue with this programming. I don't think you guys can be faulted for the circumstances. I think it's really more about the item 10 concerns, which we'll talk about. So I would propose that you have a motion.
I didn't actually make a motion. But,
you did not? Okay, well then I would move to approve the extension.
Got a motion and a second.
Any other discussion?
Second.
Brad, second. Any other discussion?
All those in favor? Any opposed?
Oh, one abstention. Thank you guys very much. All right. This is item number 8, our proposed 2019 ITALK operating budgets. Ariana,
Yes.
let's steer the ship on this one.
So, as you know, the ordinance, the ITALK submits an annual operating budget to the Board of Directors each year for approval. And the ITAC also reviews the status of its budget on a quarterly basis. The ordinance states that all the costs for administering ITAC activities are to be paid from Transnet sales tax proceeds. The funds made available to ITAC are not to exceed $250,000 per year after an adjustment for inflation. Funds not used in one fiscal year to carry forward to the next year, particularly in years when expenses may exceed the $250,000, such as when ITAC conducts a annual performance audit, as is the case this year with the FY18 performance audit. You'll also recall that in years when the ITAC does not have a triennial audit to conduct, the ITAC has decided to forego its entire annual allocation and cover its expenses through carryover funds from prior years. This year, however, is a little different in that carryover funding would not be sufficient to cover 2019 projected expenses. So one option could be for the ITAC to take a partial allocation this time. And in attachment 1, we've shown what your budget would look like by keeping the entire allocation. Attachment 2, you can see what the budget would look like if the ITAC were to forego just a portion. For this example, we're showing foregoing 75% of the annual allocation. Then that amount would be distributed to other Transnet projects and programs in accordance with how funds flow by formula for the ordinance, and attachment 3 shows the flow of funds chart. You could take action today to recommend that the board approve your FY19 budget, or ITAC could have staff bring back any changes that you would like to see for the proposed budget at the March ITAC meeting. Today we're asking that you review and discuss for possible action the proposed draft FY19 ITAC annual operating budget and determine if you would like to forego a portion of your annual FY19 allocation. The overall work program and budget is scheduled to be submitted for approval by the board as part of the draft SANDAG program budget in March, and then in final form at the May board meeting.
I would propose a motion that we set a budget based on a full allocation. Undoubtedly, we will not need all that, but the amount of money, the difference of the cycle back to the general fund is insignificant relative to all the other demands, and recognize that we don't know what the future holds, keeping our powder dry until it builds to a significant amount of money. If we're not going to use it, then we can revert back to the general fund.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, is that a motion?
That's a motion. I'll second that.
So the entire allocation, keep it, and then if not needed, then flow it to the other programs.
Okay.
So what you're asking, what?
The full allocation.
The full allocation.
Budget, the full allocation, recognizing we most likely will not need it. But to revert it back to the waterfall to everybody else, it's insignificant money, and everybody else, leave it there and see what the future unfolds.
Okay. And so that would probably be something for next year, right? Okay.
Do we have any discussion on this?
What are the other available funds used for? What, the remaining balance? What's carrying over every year? It's
part of
$207,000 that would be in FY 2018.
This adds to the new application.
It's part of the carryover, so it's interest and carryover from prior years that the ITAC hasn't used, and it just carries forward to the ITAC budget for future years.
Okay.
Past every 2 or 3 years, we decline an allocation and we consume all the carry forward. When we decline that, then the new budget just gets distributed back to all the other recipients, but it's so small.
Okay. So we have a motion and any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? No abstentions? Okay.
No philosophical issue.
Okay. We're on to item 9A.
Yes.
Transnet Channel Performance Audit.
Yes. This is a report on the status of implementation of recommendations from your last performance audit, the one you conducted in fiscal year 2015. And the ITAC accepted that final performance audit report in June 2015. Staff usually provides updates on the implementation of recommendations a couple times a year. The attachment to your report is a matrix that shows progress, including full completion of 14 out of the 18 recommendations from that audit, and partial completion of 1 audit recommendation. That leaves 3 remaining recommendations, and the plan is to complete those 3 by the end of this fiscal year. Today we're asking that the ITAC discuss the updated implementation status, and we plan to come back with another update this summer. And then as a follow-up, there was a request at your last meeting for staff to circle back on plans for communicating results of your ITAC performance audit currently underway for the FY18 performance audit. We reached out to our communications staff, and I think Irene's here. Yeah, Irene McCormick is here from our communications team, so she can help me answer questions. But we reached out to them to get a better sense of what we might propose in terms of communications plan for the performance audit. And for similar audits that the agency undergoes, usually an infographic is developed, and that's a reader-friendly handout with graphics, charts, diagrams to better visualize complex information. And that then is distributed to wider audience through multiple mediums. Then an article in the SANDAG e-newsletter, which is called Region, is included and sent to more than 50,000 email addresses. The Region newsletter is a roundup of specific events that occurred the month prior and highlights upcoming events as well. The web page for ITAC would be updated with performance audit highlights and a link to the audit itself. And then a press release would be written and sent to regional media outlets. Our staff would be available to assist the ITAC chair as the spokesperson for the committee should any media interviews be requested. And then last but not least, the audit report and infographic would be posted on social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all linking back to the ITAC webpage.
One quick question. For the budget that we just requested full appropriation, there's an advertisement line. Is that vision to cover those types of things that you just mentioned, or what is that advertisement line item for?
It can. It can also cover, for example, in the years that we have ITAC solicitations for new members, it can cover that as well. And then you also have a set aside in that budget for outside consulting type services. In the past, you've used it, or ITAC has used it for legal services when SR 175 was acquired to ensure that Transnet was a permissible use for the acquisition. So, you know, if the ITAC wanted to use it for something along the lines of, you know, communications for a particular project, they could use that as well.
I guess I was the one who brought it up, so if I can maybe make one reply. I guess, let's see where the report finally comes out, because I would say if there's anything that we feel is particularly noteworthy, you know, as opposed to just maybe send out the press release, we might think that we might want to put some work behind actually getting some coverage for one thing or another. I know Dustin is eager to get out in front of the cameras. Yeah, you know it. But thanks, but that's helpful to understand what's done, so appreciate it.
Any discussion? Thank you very much, Aaron. This is another update. Ariana again, on the 2015.
This one is.
Oh no, Ariana, I'm sorry.
Someone else.
Lamar and Jesse, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. This is an update on the additional to Ariana's items, the triennial performance recommendations for Transnet major corridors and bikeway project status report. In FY 2015, the Transnet triennial performance audit provided recommendations to better enhance the project management practices for the major corridors, the major corridor capital improvement program, increase active transportation, capital project delivery effectiveness, and improve performance monitoring and reporting. In response to audit recommendations, SANDAG staff has developed the Transnet the Transnet status reports for the major corridor program and the active transportation program. The reports monitor annual performance metrics such as the projects delivered on schedule, projects delivered on budget, and contract award versus engineer's estimates. The bikeway and bikeway miles constructed. The purpose of this item is to review and discuss the format and content of the major corridors and regional bikeway project status reports. And I'm going to hand it over to Chelsea to discuss the reports in more detail.
Thank you. So we have prepared two FY17 status reports for your review today. First, we have the Transnet Major Corridors projects, which will include all highway and transit projects. And then we have our Bikeway Program report. The data captured in these reports is as of the end of FY17. So we'll go ahead and begin with looking at the Major Corridors report. So the first metric that you'll see displayed is the breakdown of Transnet program funding. So in FY17, Transnet funds represented 33% of overall program funding for the Major Corridors program, with 67% of the program funding being leveraged from federal, state, and local sources. The ordinance requires a 50% leverage funding match, so we are exceeding that goal at this point. Moving down into the second metric, we have our scheduled milestone attainment. And we have this shown for first, projects advertised to the construction community, and second, projects open to the public. So at the close of the fiscal year, 67% of the advertised milestones planned in FY17, in the FY17 budget were accomplished. In addition, 75% of the open to public milestones planned in the FY17 budget were accomplished. And although we have these two rescheduled milestones shown before you here today, the one advertised and the one open to public, I will point out that both of these have already been accomplished within the first half of FY18. So moving on to the second page of the report, we have our support to capital ratio section. So this represents the ratio of all of our support budgets. So we define that as admin, environmental, design, construction management, legal, and communication services, all as a percentage of the total construction capital cost. And we've separated this data based on total project budget, so projects less than $30 million, $30 to $100 million, and projects over $100 million. However, there is kind of little deviation amongst these budget categories, and over the last 3 fiscal years, we have seen support to capital ratios of about 38 to 48%. Moving on to the next section, we are displaying the variance between the construction contracts and our engineers' estimates. So in FY17, the awarded value of construction contracts was around 6% higher than our engineers' estimates. However, looking at the last few fiscal years, you can see we've stayed within about 10% between FY15 and FY17. Moving down, the next metric is our total budget variance, and this is the variance between the pre-construction budget versus the final project cost, so looking at the complete project budget. The actual cost of the one project completed in FY17 exceeded the pre-construction total by about 9%.
Do you guys have a range of a goal for this one, or?
So at this time, we currently don't have a goal, but kind of moving forward, we've kind of developed these metrics kind of based on what we've seen in other regions, similar things that are tracked, but moving forward, we're kind of looking to set some more concrete goals for some of these metrics. So we're going to be working over that over this next fiscal year, setting some concrete goals for some of these. So for now, we've kind of shown the trend over the last few fiscal years for context. And then in the final section, construction budget variance, similar to the last section, this represents the variance between the planned construction budget and then the actual cost of construction. So in FY17, for the project that was completed, the variance was about 15%.
A question on which reconstruction contracts were awarded. Which projects, do you know which projects those were?
Yes.
Now, is 3 considered a lot of contracts, or what's, I mean, you are pretty consistent, I guess, fiscal year 15 with 3 and 4. Sandag's is putting on more construction contracts than that, aren't they, or is that just Transnet? That's just Transnet. Correct. And it's still, is that lower? But it's been consistent last 2 years. What was it years before that? Is that?
We've only really been capturing the data for the last 3 fiscal years as a response to the recommendations from the audit. But yeah, I mean, I think about the 3 to 5 range is about what we're seeing.
And which projects were they?
So these were, it was segment 2 and segment 3 of the South Bay BRT, and then Super Loop as well.
Thank you.
And so now looking next at our bikeway program report, so we've captured the same data I've just gone over with the major corridors program status report is also reflected in here. The one difference is in the top section, the FY17 bikeway project status. We are displaying here that first, out of the total 77 miles that we have planned for completion of the bikeway program, 68.7 miles of those were programmed through the end of FY17. And then the graphic that you'll see here kind of breaks down which phase the number of miles are in. So environmental, design, under construction, and actually completed, open to public. That kind of shows you the mileage breakdown of the bikeway projects amongst those different phases. And we've also identified the specific projects that have been completed and open to the public on the left-hand side. But otherwise, we have also shown the scheduled milestone attainment, leveraging, support to capital ratio, budget variance, similar to the major corridors report. So at this time, this concludes our summary of these reports, but we're happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
The definition between support and capital is the engineering cost of capital.
So the engineering cost is capital?
Is the engineering cost of capital or support?
That is support.
Support. Yes. But that ought to be highly noted. If it is, I missed it because engineering is a huge component. When I read support, I'm thinking admin, and I said, how can we spend half our money on admin instead of construction? That's obviously wrong conclusion. And add another general issue. I commend you. The very first bullet here on leveraging. I've always struggled a bit in my mind to understand how the original ordinance was put forth to the public. Vote for me and this is what you get. And this says that the ordinance assumed the 50% addition, so it's like a one-to-one match, if I'm understanding mathematics. And am I understanding correctly that all the projects that were committed to, if I approve this ordinance, were based on the fact that we needed to get a one-to-one match to make that happen? The Transnet money wasn't going to do that by itself. Is that right?
That's correct.
And this shows that we've done much better now. We got a 2-to-1, which is huge variation from what was promised. Yet there's some concern that we won't, over the life of the project, over the life of the ordinance, we won't be able to fulfill all the projects that we were promised.
Right.
Even though we got a 100% improvement.
Yeah. Right.
And reconciling that.
Yeah. Exactly. So essentially, what this report is intending to do is respond to the recommendations from the triennial audit, where they wanted some sort of a report card in terms of how well are you achieving the goals. So one of the goals in the ordinance, one of the few sort of performance metric goals in the ordinance is to achieve this 1-to-1 ratio, which we've done, we've exceeded. But that's kind of looking to the past, right? Looking forward, the plan of finance says that we're going to need to achieve something like a 3.5-to-1 ratio. And so looking forward, we're trying to determine what are appropriate short-term goals in terms of leveraging, so that we can start to measure ourselves in terms of are we achieving that. And then the longer-term goal is 3.5-to-1. That longer-term goal is something that we would evaluate on an annual basis just to determine, is it going up, is it going down, how well are we doing?
I'm not concerned about the report card, I'm just trying to understand the basics.
Yeah.
Am I right in assuming that if we were to achieve a 3.5-to-1 match going forward, we would be able to finish all the proposals based on our forecast now, costs and everything?
Assuming that the costs remain as they are, and assuming a whole bunch of other things, yes.
We will be.
Yes.
But I come back to my original question then, was the problem engineering scope and construction escalation that caused the inability to achieve all those projects with the promised 1-to-1 match?
I think there were a number. Yes, there's a number of things. There's when you say scope changes, let's say I'm just going to simplify something. Take a look at the Midcoast project, for example.
I understand.
You can get from point A.
Scope changes. So I live with those.
No, but
happen.
No, but it's not so much the scope change. The scope is get from point A to point B on a light rail, but you can go at grade or you can go on structure, right? It's very different costs.
Those are the answers that, my words, the scope has changed, became a much more difficult challenge than was originally conceptualized. because it's a huge variation when you need a 3 to 3.5 to the one that's promised.
And you apply that to not just Midcoast, which was one of the biggest ones, but you're saying something like that is just one of the factors that applies throughout the Transnet program? I mean, it's scope, it's other things as well, but.
Well, it's also, I mean, so
Construction
there's,
costs.
when you look at a program, it's not just looking at the cost, but you also look at the revenues. So there's the revenues that we're assuming for Transnet. You know, yeah, exactly. So they're now lower. So now in order to meet the full cost of the program, if Transnet is lower, now you need more of something else. So there's, you know, both the cost side and the revenues.
The primary villain has been cost, and cost is driven by cost components and scope. My work. But again, that variation strikes me as being huge.
Well, the needed multiplier, the 3.5 or whatever, is on the adjusted revenue forecast, right? Not
It
the
is,
original
yes.
revenue.
That's correct.
Yeah, so that's a big factor.
But even to date, because we've had actual 2 to 1,
Right.
which was huge. This is the first time I've really been able to see what the original ordinance was intending, and it assumed explicitly the one that we're on now.
I've been reading about the future, hopefully, infrastructure program of the federal government. If it goes ahead, do we have a chance of achieving the 3.5 to 1 ratio? Do we have projects online that we're going after?
So we do have projects online that could receive funding if the funding were to become available right now. We have projects at the border. We have projects on the I-5 North Coast corridor that are ready essentially to receive those funds. But if you look at the proposal coming from the feds, right now, and over the past 2-3 decades, the way that the federal government has typically funded or required matching funds from others is we'll give you 80 and you put in 20, right? So it's about an 80-20 split. The proposal from the federal government, as it reads right now, would actually flip it, where they would give you 20 and you would have to come up with 80.
Bummer.
It's not really a federal program.
Jonathan's point reaffirms the concern I've been raising. So far, I haven't been persuasive. But by the time some of this money might become available from the feds of the states, we're going to have very little money on our own because it's all going to debt service. So we're going to be foregoing the ability to match that. I know it's not all gone, and it's a function of what the revenue increase is, but I'm waiting to see that analysis, hopefully sooner than later, because I think it's going to show a very disappointing picture of our positioning ourselves to be able to attract matching funds because we spent it all to match with our borrowings to get the matches yesterday and today, and we got nothing from my grants.
Yeah.
Or the before.
I wanted to, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I didn't raise my hand. On the bikeway program, I think, we had talked about this before, it's kind of like, it's great information, but if there's nothing to measure it against, you don't really know how well you're doing. So 4.3 miles of 77 sounds really low, but this metric next, or this little graph next to it that shows, okay, well, you actually have almost all of the miles programmed somewhere, but was there an estimate of we should be this far along in the, you know, built miles 5 years into the program? Is that something that we know, or?
Good morning, my name is Linda Kaufman, I'm Bikeway Coordinator. And so you're right, you read this, we do have about 4 or 5 miles open. The program is fairly new. The board set aside the large chunk of Transnet money in 2013. So we have about 65 miles in some stage of preliminary engineering or design. And so if you look at our program, it's kind of like by 2019, 2020, we'll be opening, you know, I think 1 year it's something like 15 miles and then 30 miles. So a lot of those 69 miles are to come in the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Okay, that's great. So it's not like over 30 years that you're...
No, the program, when the board approved the $200 million, it was to be in about the next 10 years. So that's why we have, you know, so many of those miles in design and engineering now, is so that we can hit that with most of the miles. Now we're looking at, I think we'll have the remaining projects
in the 77 miles initiated by 2023, that 10-year period, whether they're all open, that's probably a question. But we'll have them at least initiated. They'll be in some stage.
And what is the major drawback to that? Is it environmental clearance, or is it just actual manpower of getting it all done? And
you know, we're seeing they all have their own reasons for
Yeah.
taking a while. I find with projects like our bikeway program is that they're on a lot of local streets, and they're next to neighborhoods, they're next to residences, and so there's so much space between this curb and that curb. And, you know, is there parking there now? Is there something that we need to correct, like it should be red curb, more of a safety, a sight line? Or, you know, we want to put in a traffic circle or a pedestrian crossing. All those, you know, are local decisions. And so we do spend a lot of time with outreach, but I think in the end, it's a good project. It's something that the neighborhood can kind of build
Yeah, in a similar vein, there's been a little bit of publicity about the issue of how much has been built, et cetera. So if I could just then follow up. I think these reports in general, you know, and the graphics are a huge step forward. Just on this bikeway program report, though, the projects delivered versus timeline, I'm not actually seeing a timeline. Maybe I'm misreading it. And so help me see where the timeline actually is. And if there isn't one, maybe you might want to just either add a timeline or change that header. But I think the timeline is important because then if you sort of go over to the right side of the page, the project status, let's pretend that members of the public actually look at these things. I question whether the term programmed helps them actually understand what's really going on. It took me about 2 years to figure it out. And so I wonder if actually adding some reference to timing would be constructive in terms of managing expectations and just pure transparency as to what's really going on. Because otherwise you look at this and say, wow, 68.7 miles of program, you know, we're kind of getting close to being done here.
It's a very good comment. And something that we do track in the budget, we have major milestones. Right. So we know when it'll be ready to advertise for construction, we know when we're in construction, when it's open. So we could work with that, you know, put some more of the timelines in there that we track anyway. It's a major.
Yeah, because presumably you have them.
Yeah.
So I think it would help the dialogue if maybe there was some of a little more transparency as to what some of them are. Okay.
I don't know that I fully understand the milestone graphics. If you wouldn't mind, like, does that mean you were shooting for 3 out of 3 of the milestones and you only hit 2?
So it means within the FY17 budget, these were the 3 planned advertised milestones. Based on the dates we included within there, we thought we were going to advertise 3 projects. So out of those 3, 2 of those actually happened within FY17, and then the one that was rescheduled happened at the beginning of FY18.
And these milestones are available in the annual program budget. These milestones are based on what we planned, or what was approved by the board in the annual program budget.
Okay.
And if they're updated throughout the year, then we reflect those changes monthly within the dashboard for the public review.
Okay. So it looks like you are getting better when it comes to the Transnet major corridors, but on the bikeway, that one's not doing so well on the milestone front. So I don't know how you guys improve upon that. But.
Well, one comment, if I could, on that, on the programmatic level, we are learning a lot. And a lot of our projects are in the city of San Diego. Mm-hmm. And as we send a project over for review and eventual approval, you know, we're hoping that time that they need to review everything sort of tightens up. But for right now, you know, we don't have a lot of projects that have been over through that process. But as we do, we hope that time condenses. But we are learning a lot more on our schedules. I think we're probably a little ambitious when we started that, oh yeah, you know, in a couple of years we'll be well on our way. And it's just finding that reality is they do take time for various reasons. Mm-hmm. One is city review.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah. Yeah, just to add to what Linda was saying, a significant, I mean, some of the projects that are along the rail corridors, I think generally progress fine. Sometimes those delays we find are engineering related, right? I think the things we're finding with these urban bikeways that are on city streets really do have to do with, you know, community buy-in and then working with even the internal city departments. I have personally met with some of the city's sort of top staff, because one of my goals is to get this project going. And really they're projects that are in their mobility plans, their community plans, their climate action plans. And we are running, it's not as smooth as we're finding as, for example, our Mid-Coast Corridor project. So I know Muggs has, and Linda, we're trying to get another meeting on the calendar with all the right folks. It's one of these things that bridges not just one department, it's stormwater, it's transportation. You know, they're focused in defense of the city teams, highly focused on paving. They've been given that goal, right? So they're paving for 1,000 miles. The stormwater folks are really focused on meeting all the requirements of their municipal, their MS4 permit. And so they have other things on their mind. So this is one thing we really want to work with them and kind of build in. So they see this as their projects because ultimately they will be their infrastructure. They will be turned over to them and not look at us as as a developer company who just develop something that they're not. Because they're really not only projects intended for the projects going forward. So it is something we do recognize, and the coverage of on it, you know, in the media recently obviously has shed some light on this. So it's something we're well aware of and we're trying to actively work on.
And do many of the bike projects entail compromising parking, such that residential and retail are hugely adverse to the...
Yeah, parking is a huge thing. And then these things like traffic circles or, you know, we call fold-outs, even changing the way the street infrastructure and sidewalk infrastructure look is something that is new and challenging with communities, residents that live along those corridors, right?
We wind up with objections. We otherwise think bicycles are very
Everyone wants them, yeah. We think everyone wants them.
But not my
actually,
backyard.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just takes some time really to build that credibility and work with the community and compromise. So we may not have, you know, something that's 100% that the community, you know, 100% stand up, but it's something that 100% of the bicycle advocates. So it's really finding what that sweet spot is.
Takes time.
Yeah, yeah. And so one of our communications director has a different, you know, analogy. He's like, you know, it's kind of like Jiffy Pop popcorn. It's like we're working on a lot of things at once, and so it's kind of they're popping one at a time. At some point, they're all going to pop. They're all going to be built. So that's our vision moving forward.
That'll be the next graphic I'm running.
I'm getting. You know, going to Kim, to your point about sometimes, you know, it's just the cities in themselves are a little, you know, they may have their priorities a little bit different. One of the things that I can't remember exactly what the context was, but we sort of added the notion that when cities are doing local street repair, they would use their best efforts to also at the same time do active transportation work. Do we have any ability to kind of give a report card on how that, you know, how that goes by jurisdiction? Do you know what I'm referring to? I couldn't cite the specific.
Routine accommodation policy. Yeah.
But do we have any ability to, do we get feedback in terms of how they're actually doing as to whether people are paying much attention to that or not?
So my understanding is in April we have the performance audit coming up, and I think that's something that may be addressed as part of that. I think it was included in the scope, so perhaps we can have that.
We'll see.
What was the first part of your question?
Well, just as Kim mentions that sometimes cities are focused on other things, but we do have as part of the funding that we give to local jurisdictions the concept that they will use their best efforts, that when they're doing any kind of street road repair, they will at the same time try to work in active transportation work. And so the question is, you know, best efforts people can be more rigorous about, or they could be less rigorous about. And it would be nice if there's any way that we could actually give a report card on how people are doing. Yeah.
I just have one question. This is a plug and a question. I see that we're all invited to the Bayshore Bikeway ribbon cutting Saturday, so that's a nice timing for this.
Ride your bike.
Yeah, all the way down from here down. But it says to date, 4.3 miles of the 77 total miles in bikeway program are completed and was bike short. Linda, is that 77, 4.3 that have been completed? So what's the difference in 77? Is that
77 is the...
that still need to be completed is 73, or is that the way that sentence reads? Is
You can check how it reads, but basically 77 is the total in the program, and of that we have opened that many miles, 4 or 5 miles. Yes.
4.3
of the 77, right. And then we have an additional 63 in design or engineering of the 77. So 77 is always the total, that's our baseline.
And I can't recollect the 77. Does that go all the way around? I mean, that's all over the county, right? The 77.
Correct. That's, you mentioned Bayshore, that's Inland Rail Trail, Coastal Rail Trail, San Diego River Trail, all of our high priority urban projects that are primarily in the city of San Diego.
What about the I-5 near Sereno Valley? Is that included in 77?
That is not included in that North Coast corridor.
I know that.
That is in addition to. And a lot of the cities have miles in addition to the 77.
So to me, it reads, a sentence reads the 72.7 miles are not completed yet.
That's good.
That's correct.
Wow, so that's a lot of work ahead of us.
That's the popcorn.
Yeah, it seems like it's a small number that's been completed.
No, it is true, because the board approved the bike early action plan in Wisconsin, the early action program for bikeways in 2013. So really you started in earnest on the planning.
Okay, so it's 2013. Okay.
Any other discussion, questions, comments on 9D? Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention a housekeeping item. I know that there is a noon.
It actually was supposed to be 1 o'clock in a different room, so we are good.
Never mind.
I thought it was 12:30.
It's at 1 o'clock.
I thought it was 11.
There is a.
I thought we were starting earlier. I was hoping we were starting by 12:30.
All right.
Are you sure it's not 12:30?
We can just talk forever.
Give me a camera.
Hi, my name is Audrey Patella. I am a regional planner here at Sandag. Before I get started on my presentation, I just wanted to make a distinction. In the reports, we did attach the Transportation Committee report to this report. For transparency, see exactly what the Transportation Committee saw. In that report, we mentioned Specialized Transportation Grant Program. The ITALC is only responsible or has the jurisdiction over the Senior Mini Grant Program, but I wanted to make that distinction that we really treat this as one program and we have 2 funding sources. So Jack is the grants administrator. I oversee the grants kind of programmatically and do the call for projects. So in our slides today and in our discussion, we will be talking about the entire Specialized Transportation Grant Program. Again, the ITALC has jurisdiction over the Senior Mini Grant. So hopefully that helps.
I missed it. What do we do not have?
You do not have any say about the federal funds, Section 5310. So there's 2 funding sources, Section 5310 and Senior Mini Grant. Again, Senior Mini Grant is Transnet funded. But I just wanted to let you know, because we are going to be talking about goals and objectives, that these would also apply to the Section 5310. We're lumping them all together. So I just wanted to make that distinction in case there was confusion about acronyms, STGP, SMG. We love our acronyms here at Sandag. So just a little Kickstarter for that. Many of you are very familiar with this program. You just heard in item 7, one of the projects. So just as an overview, example projects are volunteer driver programs, shopping shuttles, non-emergency medical trips, and the like. There is 2 funding sources, the FTA Section 310 funds and the Senior Mini Grant funds. Every 2 years we have a call for projects. Approximately $7 million is available, and now again that's with the 2 funding sources. So for Transnet, we're seeing $3.2 million of that $7 million, and this is for 2 years. So 2 years of funding, $3.2 million. So we're on our 6th call for projects for Senior Mini Grant. However, the program, again, the entire program with the federal funds have had 10 cycles, or 9 cycles completed. We're on our 10th cycle. So we're coming to you guys today, as we do for all of our cycles, to look over the evaluation. And this year, particularly because there's been a lot of attention on the subject, we really want to take a step back and talk about our goal for the program and our objectives for the program. So we're going to take a look at those today, and we really value your input on that to help inform the evaluation criteria. So first the goals and objectives, and then the criteria. So the draft program goal that's before you today, you can follow along in your report. If you look at page 6, there's kind of a summary of everything that might be easy to follow along, but I also have it up on the screen. The goal that we're proposing is improved mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities throughout the region by removing barriers to transportation services and expanding transportation mobility options. And again, just to distinguish, the Transnet Senior Mini Grant is of course for seniors, knowing that seniors also have disabilities, come with particular age-related symptoms, say, and but that the Section 5310 program is specifically for seniors and individuals with disabilities, and so that's why you'll see that in our draft goal. So for the program objectives, again, draft format, we have 4. So the first one, fund projects that are derived from either the very high priority or high priority strategies for addressing gaps in the transportation service outlined in the coordinated plan. So for context, the coordinated plan is a federally required planning document that we prepare every 2 years. It assesses current transportation services, identifies the transportation needs of seniors, individuals with disabilities, and low-income persons, and includes strategies to address unmet needs. So the coordinated plan, a lot of the projects, or a requirement of the program, is for the projects to be derived from the coordinated plan. Draft program objective number 2, fund innovative and flexible programs that provide transportation services specifically designed to meet the special needs of seniors and individuals with disabilities in the region. 3, provide incentives for the coordination among health and human service agencies, public, private, and nonprofit transportation providers to create efficiencies in service delivery, reduce duplication of service, and address any gaps in service for seniors and individuals with disabilities. And 4th, finally, encourage cost-efficient service provision through coordination, innovation, and the leverage of matching funds. So I want to pause here. If the ITALC has any comments on the draft goal and program objectives, we can open it for discussion, or I can continue to go on with my presentation. Yes.
So there's no explicit notion here, and maybe you could fill in whether there's any less than explicit notion, that part of what people want to see happen is to see the dollars spread around. And I don't mean the services spread around, I mean the actual dollars spread around. Because otherwise I'm kind of curious as to the philosophy behind limiting, creating the maximums.
Yeah, you're jumping ahead. So yeah, in my presentation and in the report, we did summarize some stakeholder comments that we received through the last cycle, through some workshops that we've already held in June and July of last summer. And then, of course, we've taken this to the Transportation Committee. So the comments have been, some of the comments do reflect that we want to see the money go to a lot of different agencies of varying size. As you heard today, these programs really have certain niche populations that they serve. But then we come to the Transportation Committee, and their primary comment is, how can we get the biggest bang for our buck? And I know that's been something that you guys have been discussing as well from last month and even today on item 7. So there's been comments on both sides. I don't know if that addresses
Got it, and I understand there may be some, just to put it crudely, politics involved here, that people want to see money going to organizations across different jurisdictions as opposed to, say, maybe there are two service providers who are doing a great job, and you just say, hey, let's just give more money to them to expand. But, okay, at least it's not explicit in the program that the money should be spread around, other than that we've got these maximums.
Right, so the governing documents really are the Transnet ordinance for the senior mini grant and then the FTA circular. So holding the federal aside because it's not under your guys' purview, but keeping it in mind. The Transnet ordinance says that these funds should be competitively awarded, and it does specifically say for nonprofit organizations and local agencies. But that's to the extent to what the ordinance has any sort of direction.
Does anybody know where the maximum concept came from? What that was intended to?
The grant request amounts that an applicant can request.
So $200,000.
Well, there's the 200,000, but then there's also that no applicant can currently request more than 500,000 per year, which would preclude, let's say, perhaps, if there's one provider who's doing by far the best job, one might say maybe they should just expand their territory and that, but they're capped out at this 500,000.
Right. So we initially put the 30,000 minimum really comes from a program like administrative.
Sure, that makes sense.
We don't want to be, having staff time executing a contract for such few dollars, and then the maximum was really set based on what kind of proposals that we have gotten historically over time. So something that we discussed today about startup costs. This program started in 2006 with the first federal funds being awarded, 2008 for senior mini grant. So at that time, I don't believe we had a maximum in place, but we were seeing kind of a trend in how much money was being requested. And then as this became more competitive, in the last cycle, I think in the last 2 cycles, we introduced these ideas of these maximums for a project and then a maximum for applicants. So that is something on the table again for this cycle to evaluate, adjust as we see fit, based on discussions here today and with the Transportation Committee.
Yeah, the maximums, there were some comments going forward, because you do have the larger agencies that are more seasoned, that have done this, or just do this, and it's really within their core work, that do compete well from an efficiency perspective, but they don't serve all over the region. So it really was something that was balancing funding kind of seasoning things and looking at some other areas that also maybe need some service coverage, but maybe, don't have that huge demand. We did get, because it was so competitive last year, we did get some folks that weren't funded, that had historically been funded, because you did have some other agencies that were more cost effective, or larger, more experienced.
That would be one of my questions is, like, out of the applicants, how many do you turn away, maybe on a percentage basis? Is that a number you guys are familiar with? Or?
Yeah, so just to give an overview of how the funding is awarded, they are scored by an evaluation panel. We use the sum of ranks. This is consistent throughout all of our grant programs, but essentially money is awarded to the highest ranked project and moving down as funding is available. So we exhaust all of the funds. So I believe, I don't have the numbers in front of me today, but we get roughly 20 to 24 projects submitted under the senior mini grant. Remember, there's $3.2 million available for a 2-year period, and we've typically been able to fund 10. And that's just with how the rankings shook out, how much money they've been requested, and how much money we have available.
So that would lead to my second comment, which really points to what Dick was saying. There should be something in the objectives about achieving milestones, about success of the program, because if you're turning over half away, then there's definitely reason to make that an important goal, because the next cycle, somebody else could certainly use the money that was more prepared to put the program in place, or if they're not working, there's plenty of other people that really want to see it work. So I don't see anything in the objectives today. You talk about creating efficiencies and cost efficiencies, but I don't see anything about milestones achieved, success in the program, something like that.
Things don't show necessarily an objective, that they would show the program evaluation criteria.
Possibly, yeah. Well, I think an objective is to make it a success, though. I mean.
Yeah, well, that's the objective, and how we make the selection, to take into consideration for what we think is going to lead to success with the evaluation criteria. I want to go back to the point Stuart raised this, I think last meeting, maybe a meeting before. I think it's a very meritorious issue that we talk around it, and maybe you folks have really dug into this, but it comes back to this example we had on item number 7, where they go, oh, woe is me, all the things we had to do that we didn't appreciate, and that's the newbie experience, and everybody's going to go through that, and there's an inherent inefficiency in that, and Stuart's trying to raise a question is, would the whole program be better served by, say, 2 organizations, which we forced them to broaden their geography, so everybody's being served, but we certainly reduce the inefficiency of having 10 people out there all doing their little thing. And the way we structured the call for proposals preclude anybody from offering that alternative. At least that's the way I read it. Not whether anybody has ever offered that in the past, or whether we've encouraged people to offer that as an alternative to this 10 years.
Or can you even do a version of, a more negotiated version of this type of program? Or do you have to actually do it on a competitive basis, which inevitably gets you to, I think, kind of where we are?
Well, we don't get to where we are if we don't constrain it to $200,000 or something.
Perhaps, but I think Kim's point still is that even if you open up the cap, you may not get people bidding for the entirety of the service.
Put that in a requirement.
There could be, so the Transnet ordinance requires a competitive process, so we've historically done it with just, here's the criteria, it's an open call for projects, so you get what you get, right? I mean, so I mean, we haven't talked really internally at the staff level, but another way you could do it is say, hey, I want to serve these areas with these kinds of services, and maybe group it, whether it's all the volunteer drivers or it's some geographic thing. And that's obviously something we could take a look at.
And you'd have to increase the budget limits.
Yeah, you would say, this is the kind of service I'm looking to provide. Who can be the best person to provide those services? So it's still a competitive thing, right? But it would have to be, we'd have to do some research in looking at the nature of the folks that provide these services, because they may not cover, they may ask for something that they don't provide coverage for, but I mean, it's a way, it'd be a different change in direction for the program. Yeah.
I'm persuaded by the point Stuart raising is whether there is a more effective, efficient alternative. Yeah. And if we haven't asked that question,
no, we haven't.
Researching the community, we strongly urge maybe not for this one, because it's too late, presumably, but before we do the next one, we really know whether there's a basic alternative to what we're doing now.
And a planning effort that we are doing, I believe it's in this year's budget, or is a specialized transportation strategic planning, a strategic plan, which I think will lend itself to where are the greatest needs, how can we provide services. So I would say, I think for this round, a lot of these organizations, while we would love for them to be operating on their own, do rely on these kinds of periodic calls to run the services they do. But as we complete the strategic plan, we can bring that as we put some milestones there, is maybe relook at how could we do this program a little differently.
Is there an alternative to what?
Yes.
And if I may, so historically, these programs, it's in the name of the program, Senior Mini Grant, and knowing that we have these programs were designed to provide mini grants to smaller agencies, we also have to think, okay, we might be wanting to change that moving forward, but also the cost of providing such a service. So the strategic plan is also looking at strategies to provide the service, but also determining how much does this really cost to provide this kind of services. Because I know when we're building our budgets, that dollar amount has always kind of been somewhat of a mystery. So looking at where can these dollars, because it is so limited, there's $3.2 million available for 2 years. So if we were to open up that $3.2 million, what kind of service would we be able to get for those dollars in terms of how much service is provided or how many riders are provided as well? So something to consider and hopefully be informed by the strategic plan.
If I can just make one comment on it, that goes back to my first question, which I think it arguably is a very legitimate goal if part of the program, in effect, is to support small nonprofits in a variety of jurisdictions. You know, that's a choice, but I haven't seen that actually be explicit in the goal, but it's almost as if the program is acting a little bit like that anyway, is kind of
well, and
my reaction.
That's why we're bringing the goal to you today, is these haven't been well defined, or at least not solidified. These are what we've been operating based on past decisions made by the Transportation Committee and the board. So really looking at where do we want this money to accomplish? What do we want them to? Do we want it to continue to be mini grants and supporting local organizations as the Transnet ordinance says in the language, or do we want it to accomplish greater, larger goal and fulfill a strategy that we've developed in these other planning efforts? So I think that's before we even look at the criteria and how we're ranking projects or what performance indicators are we evaluating on them, because we do have all of those in place, taking a step back and saying, what do we want the goal to be? And so that's why I'm here today and looking for input from you guys.
But the goal should start with the ordinance, which they do, and you've laid out, which I think is nicely stated, appropriate goals. As I understand, the only real constraints are it has to go to a nonprofit and there has to be a match. It doesn't talk about the purpose being to facilitate nonprofit growth or spend money on it. It's not just gnawing away at me, and I'm sure it doesn't escape anybody here, but we have this transportation study underway. All the problems, all the objectives that were stated by the folks here from Coronado seem to be the marketplace to solve those things called Uber and Lyft. It's a question of who pays for it. And the question is, if you had a county-wide organized system where someone who felt they met your needs could call in and say, do I qualify, send me a Lyft, and the county pays for it, and the individual cities, I guess, put in their 20% match or something. I'm just wondering whether that has been considered as an alternative to creating all this bureaucracy of having mini grids and everything, when the private sector is solving this transportation problem already.
Right. So we do see some of our grantees currently using Uber and Lyft as a kind of safety net. I know we talked about the reliability of volunteers, and the truth of the matter is that the demand for rides outpaces the amount of people that are available to provide those rides. So a lot of grantees are still maintaining a volunteer driver component, but for those last minute requests or for requests that they just can't match a volunteer to, they are using Uber Business, and they're acting as a kind of a dispatcher, because we know that a lot of seniors don't have smartphones or aren't knowledgeable enough to be able to do that. So then these grantees are serving as kind of that sort of thing. But there is something to mention that while some seniors and some individuals with disabilities can be served by Uber and Lyft, and through a facilitated manner perhaps, there are those greater needs of needing assistance in and out of vehicles that Uber and Lyft does not require their drivers to do. There's wheelchair users and the like. So there are some drawbacks, but we are seeing that integration of private-public kind of partnership. And that's something that we hope to explore further.
I'm just going to add a couple of things here. We are doing the strategic plan, and it is the strategies that will come out of that will really be sort of after we need to start this call for projects. So we are in sort of this interim phase, but some of the things you may want to consider based on the comments I've heard from all of you today with the Coronado item, and just as we've been here before, things like do we want to build into the criteria some level of project readiness? Does there have to be some proof that they've already done some operations and before saying we think we can do this amount of trips? So, you know, those are some ways to get there. Do we want to consider sort of lifting that cap and see what comes in? You know, that's another option. Are there some larger providers? And then this kind of emphasis, I think in some of the draft program objectives, we talk about innovation, maybe, you know, more of a stress of tapping into technology and utilizing, so when we have the criteria, if there are programs that are tapping into Uber and Lyft more, for example, would those get more points in this process? So those are some of the things where we're kind of, you know, I'm hearing some of that sort of from you, and those could be some things that we explore as we develop the criteria for this call for projects, while we can continue to work on this strategic plan to figure out, really the answer to the strategic plan, as Kim was saying, is what should Sandag's niche be in providing these specialized transportation services, because the need is far greater than the resources available. And so that is the question that we hope to answer with that strategic plan.
And if I could just add to that, I think you raised an important concept here, which is, I know it probably sounds like we've been raising a lot of cold-hearted financial analysis-like questions, but I think at the heart of it, I think the seniors themselves are put at risk by the way the program is structured, because the inherent 2-year turnover puts them at risk of a new service provider actually not being capable of delivering the services on a timely basis, but you're also saying at the volumes that really are required. So financial analysis is one thing, but more fundamentally, I think the reliability is an important part of this, in addition to just the economy of scale or cost efficiency. And so my feedback would be that, yeah, to enhance in the call for bids, some notion of the reliability and the dependability of delivering the service.
I do want to note that we do have what's called a past performance-based adjustment. So we do evaluate how a grantee has managed prior grants, and that comes into play with the concept that you guys were mentioning about writing a really great proposal, but then essentially failing. And so we do have that in place. Of course, we don't have that for first-time applicants. So this idea of project readiness is something that I know that the other grant programs have. Now theirs are, you know, do you have the EIR, do you have the right-of-way? So those are a little bit more measurable, but that is definitely something that we can look at. And in terms of reliability, we can definitely shape some evaluation criteria around that concept.
I would like a response to that, and I think it should be strongly considered to increase the dollar caps, conditioned upon, and I don't quite know how you do that, maybe it's impossible, an expansion of the geographic area, so someone can't propose a huge portion of the money and only cover a very small portion of the geography. And the other is this readiness issue, is I think is absolutely essential, and someone ought to think through how to articulate that. I would want to know whether Coronado, in their first time out of that, they talk to the other agencies around the county to learn their lessons learned, and it gives you some evidence in the proposal that they have attempted to learn by listening instead of by doing. And the last one, the penalty, I know that exists, but I don't quite know how the mechanics work, and I hope that the penalty phase doesn't address the performance relative to the last approved amendment versus their performance against what they originally proposed.
Right, no. It would be against, so all of our...
Original proposal?
It's the original proposal.
Then there's a question how severe it is.
Yeah, so we have a range of +2, so you can get a little bit of a boost for how well you're doing, but then it ranges to -10. So really, the way it was designed was to disincentivize poor performance. So I know we talked about the cap, but we also have matching funds to consider. Right now we have 80-20 for the senior mini grant program, and that was really in a response to the federal program. The federal program is 50%, so 50-50 for operating, and then 80% for 20% for capital. But that's something else to consider in terms of leveraging Transnet funds, whether or not we want to increase that requirement, or if we think 20% is an adequate, skin in the game sort of situation. But those are some other variables.
What is the match? Is it cash or can it be in kind?
It can be in kind. It's cash and in kind.
It just calls for creativity.
True. I think we see a lot of in-kind in terms of volunteer hours, because otherwise we would have to be paying for drivers. So we do feel like volunteers provide value to the program and is able to keep the costs low.
And this is out of the gates, they have to put in 20%.
This is out of the gates. They can propose a higher match, but this is required.
I don't have a problem with it, but because I feel like most of these programs wouldn't exist if it weren't for Sandag, as we've already kind of talked about. So, and in the case of Coronado, they're at 35, probably costing more than they thought. So,
I just think that we go, like the Transportation Committee, from the note says that they had the emphasis on lowering the maximums, and I think we just kind of, building on what Dick was saying, is that we ought to be taking a step back and not just, that's for probably the objective of spreading it around, but I think we ought to take a step back and look at policy and goals and objectives and the efficiency of what we're doing before we kind of pick off something and lower it or something for one component of a lot of things that should be looked at.
well, I think that again goes into the evaluation criteria. Are we choosing them based on the amount that they're going after, or are we choosing them based on the value of their program? And so you would want to, however you guys score it, if it was a nonprofit that had a great cause and a great program in front of them, they only wanted $35,000. Does that get less weight than somebody asking for $500,000 or $200,000? I think that's where you want to be able to fund the small guys as well as the big guys, depending on what they're putting forward. So I don't know how much the amount plays into what you're awarding.
Currently, there's no points awarded based on what you're asking for. The only kind of cost metric is the cost per trip, or how efficiently can you be providing that trip. Okay. So we do have some grantees that only request $35,000, and then they're matching, the rest of their own cash.
I'm curious if you mentioned the strategic planning and this being part of it, and that there's greater demand than there is supply. Is there any sort of analogous thinking that I've seen with regard to getting traffic fatalities to zero? Just sort of a goal is to provide rides to every senior who needs them as kind of a mission statement for this, for Sandag's role in this?
It is.
If that's what we want to put in the goal, provide rides to every single senior.
Typical that you're going to dramatically expand your plan.
Well, no, but you're already saying that the demand already exceeds.
It's really about, our overall mission is to provide mobility for all the region's residents. And so we do that through a variety of ways. And this is one program that helps a particular portion of the population. And how do we maximize our ability to do that with the resources that we have?
So to continue the rest of my report, just because I think we're already kind of talking about this, some of the comments that were received are summarized here on this slide, but also in the report. And so this idea of should we be looking at the number of unduplicated riders that they're providing over how cost efficient they are, or the priority of medical trips over social trips. So they're just kind of these comments that we received. I've heard some of them from you guys today, and really, how do we want the goals and objectives to inform how we're evaluating these projects? And I know we'll get more, a lot of answers, questions answered through the strategic plan that can inform maybe cycle 11. Right now we're on cycle 10, but as much as we feel like we can incrementally change the program right now, this is the time. We're not too late. We're anticipating to release this call in the summer. So we're really coming in early. We're going to go back to the Transportation Committee after holding a public workshop, which is going to be on February 28th. We just firmed up that date. So we will be getting public input and then going back to the Transportation Committee to tell them kind of what we've learned and really solidify some of these key goal objectives, the minimum and maximum grant request amounts, the matching funds, and then we can dive a little deeper into the evaluation criteria.
To answer your question about the goal and the outcome, we've had these internal discussions on the reset. What is this call for progress going to get us? And so I think that is something we can take a look at, maybe at least to articulate. We think, given this number of funds and what we expect, we can provide, X number of trips to seniors. So I think we can take a look at that and maybe come back with and try it. If we haven't articulated it in that way, we've articulated some high-level program goals and objectives, but we can at least put a number to it. And then as you allocate it and as we monitor the cycle, see where we are. Did we hit it? Did the quality of the applications we got enable us to hit that goal? Or we might need to adjust it given the ones that become recommended for funding, and then you see where we are. But that's a legitimate point.
Does each agency, like Coronado, will they have to reapply every 2 years? Okay, so the program could not win and they would just go away, or they would fund it themselves.
Yeah, or they fund it, yeah.
Same question again on Coronado. Lessons learned. If you knew, if Sandag knew that it was going to take a year to not have a facility or dedicated staff, what would you have done? What would Sandag have done differently to allow that not to happen? And this, if going forward with a new process, how could that have not happened? How would you have been able to identify?
I could probably. I think maybe.
Say it a little differently. When you get to propose, I put a proposal there. If you don't believe my proposal, do you have the ability to downgrade it on the believability? That's not the best word, but I think that's good. What that's getting at is.
I think we have to make sure. I don't recall that we have questions about project readiness per se.
Not on this program.
But had we known that they didn't have the infrastructure in place, right, or the staff in place, and the staff capabilities that they were relying on this grant to start it up, it may be something that we would have looked at.
The achievability, if I say $6 a ride, and you know from all your experience and other things that $8 a ride is really tough to go with.
Yeah.
Do you accept my $6 or do you challenge that?
I mean, some of the things they even talked about is even asking questions like, what's your expected mileage of your trip? So with volunteers, you could do kind of a general thing, okay, cost per mile, it's about this, is that reasonable? So I think there are questions that we can ask to the different types of programs that would suss out that kind of information.
But it could also be the case in the current system, correct me if I'm wrong, that even if they had, let's call it sort of, tenuous sort of outlook for reliability, if you just go to the next ones down the list, you may not actually have a service provider bidding for the Coronado area. Is that correct? Right. So the current system, the current system also has some issues with the goal of maximizing geographic coverage.
That's an interesting point. I missed it, but to what extent can you, using your example, Coronado's here, but you want to disqualify for some reason, but if you do, then Coronado doesn't get any coverage at all. Are you required to allocate, make sure you have maximum coverage independent of the score?
Not right now.
I mean, we, as as custom to any of our grant funds, we do a social equity analysis to make sure there's not any disparity in how the funds are allocated in terms of low income and minorities. But in terms of geographic coverage, that's not a criteria or something that we're looking at this time. I can say generally we have broad coverage of the entire region. There are providers that do provide service to all areas of the county. However, in terms of kind of niche, rapport with the community and just attentive to needs and stuff, in terms of pockets of locations that aren't as well served. That answers.
Yeah, I mean, you had an example, I think, the last meeting with another volunteer driver program that was struggling. Mountain Health?
Mountain Health.
Yeah. Mountain Health, right? So I don't think we see a whole lot of providers coming up saying, hey, I want to service this population in Hamul. So I do think you have these pockets, as Audrey mentioned, that, you get it because we're sort of encouraging or opening it up like this. But yeah, if they don't rank, then you could have service gaps from a geographic perspective. This is disgusting.
Next steps. Yeah, as I mentioned, we're going to have a public workshop with we're really initially seeking input from current grantees and past applicants, so they may not have been successful, but those of them that are familiar with the program, we're going to have that on the 28th. We're going to collect that feedback, the feedback we heard here today. We're going to go back to the Transportation Committee in the spring, again, to then really do a deep dive in the evaluation criteria. I suspect we'll come back to you as well for those. And then, as is customary, we ask for the ITALC and the Transportation Committee to recommend the evaluation criteria to the Board of Directors. And so the Board of Directors has the authority to approve the evaluation criteria and release the call, and that is around the summer timeframe.
So it sounds like we'll get an opportunity to see.
We'll take your input.
Yeah. What manner would you like that input? Should we just coordinate with Ariana individually, or do you want?
Yeah, I mean, if there's more than what we've kind of discussed here, certainly through Ariana, we'll coordinate.
It's interesting, just on this back page, part of the ordinance saying, the last little part, and brokerage of multi-jurisdictional transportation services. So it sounds like one of the goals is to get people not just working in one area. So that's probably somewhere where we can try to encourage more applicants to go for.
We really appreciate your input. You've given us a lot. This is really helpful.
Thank you.
So check. 12:30 or 1 o'clock?
So we have the room, so we could go, or?
Well, I was just pointing out, our schedule is to start at 12:30 for the other thing, not 1 o'clock.
Yeah, we don't need the full half an hour, because you have the pre-meeting. The interview is pre-meeting at 1 o'clock. Okay. Sorry about that. Oh, okay. If we have at least 15 minutes in the other room to get ourselves organized before, then we'll get.
So 12:45. I don't think it'll take us that long.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
All right.
We're almost there.
We're on to item number 11.
Good morning. So this time each year we prepare the short-term revenue forecast, and this allows our partner agencies as well as Sanding staff to plan for capital projects and determine the operating subsidies for the upcoming 5 years. So these estimates reflect fiscal year 2019 through fiscal year 2023. The attachment to your report shows the estimate for the overall Transnet program, which is just under $301 million for fiscal year 2019. And this reflects a growth rate of 3% over the 2018 estimated revenues. Those are shown in the attachment on the far left. So
so just to refresh what was approved last year. So when you look over the full 5-year period of 2019 through 2023, the Transnet estimate is about $1.6 million. There are high and low ranges that are provided, and these really are just for information and planning purposes. But our agencies can only program or commit funds up to the mid-range, which is the actual estimate itself. They cannot over-program. It's at their discretion to under-program. You usually see that in your local street and road report, for example, how much of their available funds they've programmed when Lisa brings her reports to you, but they cannot over-program. So the estimates are going to be reviewed by the Transportation Committee this Friday, and then the Board of Directors next week on the 23rd. And upon board approval, the estimates would be released to the transit agencies and local agencies for their planning and programming use. You may recall for the last 2 years when we brought this item to you, we had revisions to the current fiscal year. This year we are on track to collect what we've estimated for 2018, so we are not proposing any revisions to the current year. And then just to briefly kind of refresh your memory on how this forecast is produced, we are using currently a model that applies Department of Finance population data, considers growth rates in per capita retail sales from the average of 3 national forecasts, and these are the IHS, Global Insight, Moody's, and Woods and Pool data that we receive. And then the consensus projected inflation rates from those 3 sources. And then for 2019, the forecast is also calibrated to current economic conditions, data we receive from the California State Board of Equalization sales tax revenue allocation formula, where we are year to date in our sales tax collections, and then a forecast by Muni Services, one of our consultants. So these general economic conditions are considered for the upcoming fiscal year forecast. So Jim Miller and I are here to answer any questions you may have about the forecast or the methodology. You really don't have any recession built into this at all.
We don't. Actually, Muni Services, who is our contractor that helps us with our financial planning, does do, for Transnet specifically, Taxpayer specifically, they do a recession scenario for us. But in this case, we have not put in for the next 5 years a recession scenario. And we do talk a lot with Muni Services. The first year, as Don explained, the first year we look at a lot of different factors, and then for years 2, 3, 4, 5, we look at basically the 3 forecast consensus. Muni Services, generally speaking, when they just gave us a longer term forecast, they're much more gloomy on longer term growth than the 3 forecast consensus. They also have a lot more specific data and expertise on what's happening in the retail market. The retail apocalypse, as it's known, despite the fact that we are doing quite well right now, there's a limit to how well we can be doing it. When Andre comes up in a few minutes with me, we'll talk about how our unemployment rate is down to 3.5% in San Diego. There's not too much lower we can realistically go. So there's there is not a lot of real growth potential in the long run. Right now, we're really being saved. You see a lot of reductions in brick and mortar retail. We're really being saved by restaurants. Right? It's really the gas prices are rising a little. That's helping mitigate certain things. But in the long term, you really are seeing erosion, and this is something that Ray and I discussed with Muni Services in detail yesterday. In the long term, you really are seeing an erosion of the taxable base. Muni Services likes to talk about the phone book-sized list of exemptions to state state and sales tax. For example, if you go into a Subway and you order a cold turkey sandwich, that's not taxable, but if they heat it up for you, it's taxed. If you go to a garden center and get a lemon tree, it's not taxed, but a pine tree is taxed. So there is a huge list of exemptions to state sales tax, and it keeps growing. All those exemptions are almost never taken off. magazines are not taxed, newspapers are. So it's, basically whatever concessions state lawmakers want to make to individual constituents. And again, in the long run, we are seeing an erosion of our sales tax base, which is creating muni services real more gloomy aspect than the forecast consensus. And we're looking at that, really redoing our way of forecasting sales tax. We're not particularly married to the 3 forecast consensus. We use that because it's outside sources that have a lot of credibility. And I think we want to take a deep dive. We are planning to take a deep dive with community services and the ways that we can forecast internally sales tax that would be a little more robust and take into account, like we do in the 1-year forecast, local economic conditions.
And one of the things I think I understood you saying, that one of the uses for this is agencies can't program projects unless there's an authorized projection for revenues. If that's the case, even if it's not just general information, the major quarter program line, I would think that would be far more informative if there were 2 sublines that goes with that. One is borrowings, so there will be more money available in those years, and the other is debt service, when this amount of money will not be available for program because it's going for debt service.
Right, and debt service and the major corridors, sort of projection is something that Andre is covering as part of his.
My understanding the purpose of this is to show how much money someone officially is.
Right, so these are the gross revenues that would be available to each of the programs.
Available after debt service?
Gross revenues before debt service.
That's my point.
Yes.
So if I'm supposed to rely on this to make my programming, I'm not going to get this much money because some of it's going for debt service. Or conversely, I'm going to get more of this money available for me to program because there's going to be borrowing. I'm suggesting that this line needs to be blown up to include all 3 components to really know what the net is that I can program.
So these are forecasts of what we anticipate to collect within each of these periods, and they don't reflect reserves, other sources of funds, anything that could potentially be covering those, that debt service each year. In the plan of finance, we do consider that, and it forecasts based on our cash flows, how much funding is available to carry from 1 year to another. Some of that debt service, could be covered by some of those carryover funds. So if we took out just, I don't know that it would be as accurate as you would be looking for it to be expanded here. If you would like, we could possibly, at the bottom of this report, reflect what our debt service estimates are for the year to be covered from those additional sources. But I don't think it's a takeoff from this particular
So I think
number.
that the main intent of this particular report, it's an annual report, it's simply to say this is our forecast of revenues, independently of what the expenses
I thought one of the
might
uses
be.
was I needed to have information so that I can program it, and that's not the number I need to program.
No, so this is just a revenue forecast for the short term.
Yeah, we do, however, we hold our local agencies, because our regional tip has to be fiscally constrained. In any given year, our local agencies, for example, cannot exceed that local system improvement line. So for 2019, we cannot have in our RTIP more than this $96.1 million in Transnet LSI funding. The major corridor program, the Transnet funds within it are one element, but we program many additional funds towards those projects. So the programming of major corridor funds is a little different.
Quick general question. It looks as if, looking at the big numbers, total numbers, you're increasing each year a little more than 3%. Is this because of projected inflation, population growth, combination of everything?
All 3 of those, yeah. There's population growth, inflation, because these aren't inflation adjusted. There's a population, inflation, and increase in per capita spending.
On a related point, I was going to say, for sake of transparency, it would be helpful if there could also be a summary of key assumptions So for example, just to explicitly break out what the population growth assumption is, if there are any other major variables, it would just help provide context for the reader to see how, you know, aggressive or conservative.
Yeah, the
these may
assumptions
seem.
about inflation are in the low twos, and the assumptions about population growth are less than 1%, whereas and the per capita growth in the sales tax is less than 1%.
Yeah, so I think just actually breaking those out would be helpful for the reader. Thanks.
Is someone gonna, maybe we've already done this, but talking about the projections for the 5 years, is someone gonna go into more detail about the revenue projections or anything? Or is that what you guys are doing? I guess I'm just still like, how can you just have a flat increase every year?
Why are we not assuming a recession scenario?
Yeah,
Something
or,
along
I
those
mean, I know
lines?
you've got a low and a high, but it's like, I don't know. It
Yeah,
just
I mean,
seems
the
very-
recession scenario is, we've been in expansion for quite a long time, but the saying is that expansions don't die of old age. There's a trigger, typically, whether it be a housing bust or an oil crisis or some political instability. And those are hard to predict. I think it would be difficult for us to say 10 years ago that we'd be expanding for the next 10 years. So it's, I think we could perhaps, for an informational basis, put in the recession scenario that Uni Services built in. They pushed that scenario out to 2021 because they're looking at the next few years. They might pull it back in based on what's happening economically now. An added accelerant to the economy tends to increase the likelihood of a downturn in the year. But we could certainly add that for informational purposes. I think for our planning purposes, when you look at these long-term forecasts that we get from IHS Fiscal, they do take into account the ups and downs. It's more of a lower trend line than it would be if it was always expanding. Their models are based on past performance, and that past performance does include the ups and downs.
So this, area on attachment 3 in the next item, is sort of the history, page 7, so of the estimates that have come in. So is this basically similar? I mean, that's the past, but this is going forward, basically, is what this is, right? The estimates on, I'm just curious, on the, so that's all this, that's the history of this going up, and then this continues on. So that's all I was just curious about. So every year it's gone up since 2011. Or 2009 to 2010 it went down, and ever since the estimates has gone up. I guess as well as the actual. So I'm just curious. So have we seen this document before like this? What do you do?
Every year in February.
Wow.
The last couple of years, we've tried to be a little more conservative. Last year's 2.7% growth. This FY19's 3.0% growth. We've tried to be a little more conservative because we have come in under estimates.
So going back to Caitlin's point, is this fair here that the model says here's the number, and that's the number that we're using as our kind of midpoint estimate? Or to your point about the fact that you want to smoothen out the extraordinary growth blips from the recessionary growth blips, you take the model number and sort of discount it to smoothen out for the...
Exactly right. Yeah, we want to be able to plan to kind of a long-term trend and understand that in some years we're going to do a little better, and in some years we're going to do a little worse, but we don't want to be constantly reacting to those short-term trends by, a small change in the long-term trend over 30 years has a big impact in the 30th year, in the those last few years, which has an extraordinary impact on the total that you might assume is coming in. So we're trying to be a lot more stable and really not overreact to those short-term trends. Oh, we had a great year this year, so that tail wags the dog, and we should assume great years. We're trying to be a little more conservative, and exactly as you say, smooth out the longer-term trends, lower maybe our expectations of growth based on some of the recessionary scenarios that we've seen, as well as those factors I mentioned before that Mimi Services likes to bring up to us, where long-term trends are towards non-taxable items, housing growth, housing costs, healthcare costs are growing faster than other things that could pinch people's ability to spend on taxable items. We haven't seen that in the data yet, but that's what we've been told to expect. So, again, trying to not to overreact too much to good times or bad.
Just conclude that an estimate is an estimate, and it probably will not be correct.
One thing I can guarantee about a forecast is it's going to be wrong.
But it's not like the weather.
We are on to item number 12. We do have a speaker slip for item 12. What I would propose to do is have Lisa give her presentation and then have the speaker come up after that and then discussion with the committee.
Okay, so this is your quarterly financial data for the period ending December 31st. Because of the time, I'm going to do this in fast mode where it's going to be based on questions from you, basically just general overview. So we have our regular 6 attachments. Attachment 1 is your overall quarterly report. That's going to show you your revenues received for the quarter, fiscal year, and then over the life of the program to date. To the left and then to the right are going to be your disbursements, breakdown between your program disbursements, which are the payments to the local jurisdictions or for project expenditures, and then your debt service is called out to the right of that. So that's about 1.5 pages there. We're on page 2, we're providing your commercial paper program activity. The schedule to the left of the CP is fiscal year to date, but also is program to date of every jurisdiction or program that's been in the CP program, not necessarily currently, just over the life so far. And then to the right is those that are currently in the program, or like the city of La Mesa. We're in the final stages. We have to wait for the RTIP amendment to be approved before we can execute an agreement with them. We've discussed this I think a couple months ago, and that's gone through approval. And we always keep Major Quarter and the Major Quarter EMP on there, even because it comes and goes with them. The bottom, the other activity on that page, that is the Major Quarter program and the Major Quarter EMP program. The EMP, it borrows sales tax from the Major Quarter because the EMP program had all of the land acquisitions towards the beginning of the ordinance, which was expected, and therefore their spending rate was kind of at the beginning without the revenues coming in. So in order to meet their debt service, they have to borrow the sales tax, and we level that out on a monthly basis. And then our last page there is these are bonds. We are now complete with the 2014 bond. We have spent all of the proceeds. The last pieces were the City of Del Mar and the City of Santee. You can see the quarterly, and so we've now closed that out. And then we're working through the balance of the 2016 bonds right now. Any questions on this report? Okay. And then we have attachment 2, I'll do last. I always do that one last. I should probably rearrange this. So let's go to attachment 3. We've already kind of just discussed this a little bit. This is your estimate and the actual sales tax received. The bottom portion is going to be for the current fiscal year. You can see how each month is working out against what we've estimated. And then it carries forward to the top so you can see year over year where we are, actual to estimates. Estimates. And we're doing well.
The annual forecast versus prior year is actually just the growth in revenues, right, for the loss.
Say that
The
again,
last
sorry.
column, the annual forecast, well, I guess that's not true, it's a forecast, but what is, this is showing, it would be nice to see actual versus actual to see the growth. Oh, you've got that, I guess. Current year actual versus prior year actual. So that's the one that shows the growth. And then we're comparing that to the, I think you calculated, was it 3% growth?
3% plus a little bit.
So based on
The
the
18 of,
past,
18 or the 19.
on the previous 5
Yeah,
year.
And the previous one.
I'm just saying, okay, well, if it's, 3% and you guys have done fairly well other than in the recessionary periods, that's generally a decent number to use. So, I don't know, there's just, the actual is the most helpful, obviously. So.
Okay, moving on to attachment 4. This has kind of been covered already, your budget. And I've noted that you are keeping the full allocation for FY19. So I'll make sure that we keep that going on this schedule. We're still spending down on the 2 audits that are currently underway. And so we'll see what that final net difference is for the year. It will adjust a little bit, and then we'll adjust that at year end. Moving on to attachment 5. Okay, so this is a look at the 30% of the local street improvement. We have to monitor what we pay out to the local jurisdictions to ensure that we're not giving them more than 30% of the annual revenues for maintenance projects. We do, every month that we pay any of the jurisdictions for maintenance, we check that in a couple of different ways to ensure that we aren't over committing the sales tax. And the columns, when we move over to the right, the column E, so this is going to be the, if we assume that everything that every dollar that came in, 30% was always used for maintenance, none of it was for the congestion relief. This is where we would end up, these are the balances available, which would be cash. However, we do know that several of the jurisdictions use more than 30%, or excuse me, use more than 70% for their congestion relief. Right. They can use all of it for congestion relief if they want to. So what column F is telling us is this is really the cash available for these jurisdictions. So, for example, the third one down in the city of Coronado. So our column E is saying that, if they really only spent 70% on congestion relief, they would have cash of 1.5 million. However, there's 1.4, excuse me, 1,040,000 available because they're spending more on congestion relief. So this is one of the checks that we do. It's not just what's a balance based on 30% overall, but really what's our cash at the time. So we look at both of those. So everybody's okay from this standpoint. We're not providing more than 30% to any of the jurisdictions. Attachment 6. So these are the grant projects, or excuse me, programs that we have. We have the 4 programs. We provide the total revenues received through December 31st. And then we also break out for the ATGP, which is our bicycle pedestrian, and then for the local EMP, some of the revenues used for the program are going to be for our regional, not necessarily for the grant program. So we kind of have to pull that aside to give you what is awarded to date, which is going to be your column C, and then we provide the expenditures to show you the unspent grant commitment, and that of course was the focus of the ITALC, to see kind of where they are at the time, what is unspent yet committed. And there are 10 footnotes to this to kind of give you some insight on where the different programs are in their cycles. Good on that? Yeah, okay. Let's go back to attachment 2, which in the future I will make this attachment 6. So there were comments in the last meeting about our column I. Column H. Programs found available to draw available. No, column I. Yeah, H and I. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this as a whole. So what we're trying to get to is what is the spending threshold, the rate for the different jurisdictions, and we look at this 2 ways. First, we look at a 60% threshold. And we say, okay, of what's come through, what they've spent down, where are they? And only 2 of them are below the 60%. That's kind of a low threshold. But really what we're looking for is a 75%. The ITAC changed that to the 75, I think 2 years ago, realizing that was probably a better rate to look at. And what we do at this point, the 75, is we take into account what we're expecting in revenues through the end of the year, not just to this point, but what's also been programmed through the rest of the year, right? Because that's what, as far as we know, whatever's programmed is what they intend to spend. So then we kind of factor those 2 together, plus where we are right now, to come up with our column I, which is what has not been programmed, but is estimated to come in. So we're hoping that our column header here is a little more clear than it's been in the past. It's the estimated cumulative balance available, right? So it's our estimated sales tax for the different jurisdictions that it hasn't been programmed. So it's available for future programming. And everybody's met the 75% threshold, which I think this is may have been 2 quarters now. Or Carlsbad may not have met it the last time for their ongoing reason, but now they're finally further along in their project.
So reading this correctly, it's like the city of San Diego might have $50 million available to draw, but they only have $1.25 million that's not programmed for the project.
City of San Diego is.
Well, that's the way I read it.
Yes.
So I'm just thinking related to some of the public comment earlier about fund balances not being.
Yeah, so they're showing, right, so this is based on what they have programmed. They're telling us that at this, point, unless they have an RTIP amendment in maybe the next cycle,
right,
that they do intend to move forward on a fair amount of projects.
My only thought about this, I'm looking at number J, where it looks as if everybody's in great shape.
Yep.
But they're not all going to be spent, am I correct? It's either going to be spent or programmed by the end of the year. Is that correct, Lisa?
Yeah, so
it may not be
right, so it may, right. So the audit's going to show us what has actually been spent.
Would you like to insert the words "or programmed," spent or programmed by the end of the year?
Well, which is it factually? Which is it? I was going to say also because it actually almost strains credibility that they're going to get so close to 100% being spent.
That's right.
Well, so the assumption, right?
No,
so the
this is
assumption
spent.
is
This is spent.
if it's been programmed, then it will be spent because that's the purpose of the programming.
But programming isn't
program
necessarily within this one fiscal year, right? Programming
That's right.
can go across
Programming is-
fiscal years, no?
We're in the second year of the biennial, so this would be this year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is the good year.
Okay, gotcha. Maybe there's another footnote.
Yeah,
To
we
remind
could, we
us.
could do that, yes.
Okay.
It does say remaining biennial programmed amount. Okay, footnote 3.
We're struggling with definitions, if I'm understanding this. The word programming, that's the first step in a big, long process, or what can be a big, long process. I have to conceptualize, I got ABC projects, so I program it, and I allocate so much money to that. And maybe, between the city of San Diego, nothing happens, because I can't get through my bureaucracy or something. But your report shows everything's copacetic because they've programmed it. The money might not be spent for many years. We've had one agency here that purposely just trying to accumulate a lot of money to do one big project. It might be very meritorious.
Yes.
But it also can reflect in a very slow process to get streets repaired because they can't get out of it. They do programming to satisfy you. That's easy. I just write a piece of paper, program. And then I get you off my back, but I don't get any road bill.
Right, and this is the information that's readily available to us, is the programming. So that's why we use
We
this
have to
here.
realize the shortcomings of what this tells us. It doesn't get to money actually spent.
That's right, because they have to go through design sometimes.
Yeah.
They may
Right,
program
and
their
the annual audit is, that's where you're gonna
Well,
see that.
I guess,
Yeah.
all I'm saying is, should you add the words "or program" on item number J? to be
I just wanted to point out that most of the programming is based on the city budgets, so it's not just like they threw it in the programming document to say, don't bother us. They have approved budget and they have gone through their council to program these dollars. So.
Is it realistic the city of San Diego really in the next 3 quarters is going to spend $50 million?
Yeah, they're not going to, they've been carrying over 30 million at the end of the year in unspent money. And now that money may be programmed for the, and first of all, City of San Diego has given us a nice backlog list of all the projects they've got, which we've been pushing them for. And I commend the City of San Diego for that. But I'm just looking at your column J, that's all, Lisa.
I mean, you know, is the intent there? I think it is. But we all know things happen at any of the agencies throughout the year that could, you know, change something. And it could be a funding source change as well. It doesn't mean that the project may not be, you know, moved along. It could be that Transnet is taken off the
These
project.
things happen, understand?
Yeah. Yeah, and, yeah.
I don't like your line. These amounts will be spent by the end of the fiscal year.
Well, it's anticipated.
By who?
It's anticipated.
By who?
Based on the based on the information that they provide, right? So if they provide the programming based on their budget, the intent is that they will be spending it down.
But that's not what they tell us when they meet with us. They like to carry over $20, $30 million is what they have said. Okay, you do what you want.
That's actually a really good point. I mean, they said that very specifically,
said
that they're
that's
never
their-
going to spend the 50 because they
that's their
purposely
comfort.
hold back 20.
That's their comfort zone. Hey, I'll think in my mind that you mean spent or program. You can put whatever you want in your column J.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
awesome.
I have a note, so we'll think about that.
Okay, that's good, I'll accept that.
You say that they're actually telling you they've programmed it, and based on their forecast for each individual program, the aggregate, they will spend all that money by the end of the period? Do they get that explicit, that they say they're going to spend? Or they just say it's programmed to be spent?
Well, it's, yeah.
I'm just going to clarify. So they do a 5-year every 2 years, which Sue will bring this later this year, and their money is programmed based on their projects that they say they're going to. And it's not specifically to spend, it's to draw from us. So that's what they're going to request from us. They can spend it at a later date. So this was originally put together because the ITAC wanted to see, okay, that's great, what have they spent so far? Now, what do they plan on doing by the end of the year? And that the RTIP was our only mechanism to see what they're going to plan. So if Sue brings an RTIP and it has the City of San Diego projects and they have money programmed, I think that's also a time to ask, if they're going to be programming this money, are they going to actually request it from Sandag?
Yeah.
So I think
That's what your definition of spend is, that they actually drew it from you
Correct.
and put it in their bank account. It
Oh,
could
that's
sit there
your
for 2 years.
Yeah, correct. We can't really, we don't have any
That's all the
visibility.
information you have, I understand that, but it doesn't tell us how fast they're spending the money.
But we get a lot of information when we do the audit.
When you do the audit, you have what
Right,
the
so
actual
we're
There is a
trying to
column
get
of
out of this
spend,
something
so
that
there
we
has
don't
to
get
be
out of
some-
this historically, we get it out of another.
All right.
And And we do, column E are the balances that they are currently holding. So we can see what we have for them and then what they have at this time as well. So we do.
Right.
Yeah, they have a very small balance, which, and they have been trying to keep their balance down because they do try to stay below that 30% threshold, the balance at year end.
Didn't we, I'm not trying to delay the meeting, didn't we get an email from a disgruntled citizen?
She's here to speak.
Hmm?
She's here to speak.
She's
waiting.
She has the speaker slip
All right.
for this
But
item.
I believe she used the word hoard, and I think her numbers were wrong. But that's the sort of thing that we're trying to make certain we understand what the city is doing.
Right. And the audit, which you'll see the drafts in March. The auditor will be here to present the drafts to you, so you'll see what the balances were. Now, of course, it's at June 30th, but at the same time, each quarter, they're providing us with a current number, which is, in this report. So you can always see where they are.
Fine. Thank you. I understand what you're saying. Thanks, Lisa.
The speaker.
Yeah. Speaker. So, Catherine?
Thank you. And yes, of course, exactly what I was talking about, especially for the attachment too. And so, on the bottom of page 89, there's a recommendation number 7 that says replace the 30% fund balance limitation with a more effective measure to monitor performance. And the only reason anybody would want that changed is so you can't see all the money that they're hoarding. And so when I went and looked at the numbers that they gave you, they gave you that there's only 500, on column E, that there's only $537,000 that they have. But if you look at their comprehensive annual financial report, they say they have $21.5 million in that account. So the numbers that they give you, it says right here, they're not audited. So what I would say is that when staff gives you that number, that you should actually go to the comptroller and confirm with him that that number is accurate, because I believe they're giving you false information on here so that they will look good, when in fact there's actually a lot more money sitting in the bank according to other documents. And that's where I talk about the inconsistency in the numbers that the city provides in the CAFR report, for example, or the other reports that I had gave you, the backup documentation, compared to what Sandag has, because that's kind of what they do. They've always not really met that 30% maximum, as you can see in the other documents. So what I put there as a solution is that if you force the city of San Diego to use your same budget document, so we could see, because right now they just kind of give you a list of what things are. They don't actually tell you, one of the things they don't have for their CIP projects is a construction start date or a construction end date. And so what they do is they'll throw out a whole bunch of things that they say they're going to do, but then they never actually do them. It kind of goes on year after year. So, so I would ask you to look at my documentation and see how things are not clear, things are not consistent, and it should be audited numbers instead of unaudited numbers.
Can we address this by, we have an audit that's almost complete, to ask our auditors to address this particular issue? Unless you guys can answer it yourself, but if there is.
I've already written down the answer.
If there is lack of clarity, have our independent auditors opine on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll include that in my my agenda report for that item for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 13.
5 minutes.
Yes. So we also have a speaker slip for this one. They have the same process. We have Ray, our Audrey and Bill, right?
Jim today.
Go through-
Usually Ray.
Yeah, go through the presentation and then public comment after that.
So, since the last time we came on a quarterly basis, just want to give you a quick update, and since I know we're running a little bit late today, we'll keep it fairly short, but not much has changed. So Jim will give you a quick update on sales tax economy. I know he's really talked about some of it, and I'll kind of give you an update on our debt profile, and then give you a taste of what's coming up. So I'll turn it over to Jim first to talk about
Yeah, briefly, you may have heard in the news, we had a bit of an oopsie in the stock market recently, but that only set us back a couple of months. Things have settled down a little bit since then. I don't know what's happened in the last couple hours, so don't hold me. 10-year Treasury has spiked a little, reflecting some uncertainty. The Fed has raised their rates again, and I think we can expect a few more rate increases, possibly 2 or 3 this year. Inflation is hovering just about where the Fed would like it, at about 2%, has not changed in a year. Locally, as I said before, unemployment is down to 3.5% locally, which is very, very low. We haven't seen a drop in the labor market labor force participation rate either, so this isn't an anomaly. You know, the local unemployment numbers can go up and down a little more than the national numbers because they're based on a smaller sample size, but this is still extraordinarily low, and there's not too much lower we can go. We hope and we expect that that will result in increased wages, and we've seen evidence of that over the last year or two. That's good news because wages had really been flat for quite a long time prior to that. Housing prices continue to jump. Unfortunately, now only about a quarter of San Diego households could afford a medium-priced house. They were required to buy one. That could have long-term consequences to our economic health. And taxable retail sales, you can see, we're up 3.3% in FY 2017. They continue to rise healthy, subject to the caveats I talked about before, where the economy can't really get a whole lot better, and we have seen a big dip in brick and mortar. Again, we've been saved by things like car sales and restaurants, but those tend not to continue to improve time over time. They can tend to level off. So that was my quick summary.
So when I was here last meeting, we had just priced the SR 125 refinancing. Maybe wanted to give you a quick update on how that reflects on the commission. So the demand was very strong. We had 200 million in paper. We actually got 4 billion in orders. So we actually repriced and worked the pricing down. We ended up at 3.33%. It's A-level paper, but already priced as AA+, like very close to our AAA ratings for our Transnet bonds. It's a couple things happened in the market that day. We actually hit that day was one of the lowest days of the year. Even a day or two after, rates started going up, and obviously we've seen them go up since then. So really it was a win-win-win. It was a win for SR 125 and the fact that they're saving $147 million in cash flow. Net present value basis was $88 million, and plus they have a level debt service. For the commission, it's a win that we got back our $62 million that we had loaned them, of which a majority of it, $52 million, was actually being placed in the contingency fund. All the CIP projects do have contingency on them, anywhere from 5 to 10%, depending on where they are in their lifeline, average of 8%, but this is a contingency-wide for the whole program. And then last year was actually a win for the TIFIA office in the sense that this asset was originally in bankruptcy, but they basically came out, basically making all their money, getting full amount of what they initially placed, which obviously you don't see when an asset goes into bankruptcy. And obviously, as a long-term partner, one of the things we do have is a TIFIA loan on the mid-coast, so it's something that we're pleased. They were pleased, and hopefully we'll build a relationship with them. So just want to point out, as far as our debt portfolio, nothing has changed since the last time, but maybe one of the things I can show you here is the TIFIA loan that we took out. for $537 million. We have not put that in yet. We anticipate putting that in about 2021, but just want to show you here the rate that we got back then is 2.72%. I just looked at the 30-year Treasury today. It's at 3.17%. So the rate is about 46 basis points higher. If we were to take the loan out today, it's about 16% of an increase that we've had. So the attractive thing about the TIFIA loan is that we could lock it in even though we didn't take it out. As opposed to a bond financing, you basically take the money out and you start paying right away. So, it did take us 2 years to get the TIFIA loan, but now we can see, we can bear the fruits. If rates continue to go up, obviously did a good thing by taking it out.
Only the government can give you a loan without a commitment fee. Unbelievable.
Beautiful thing. Just looking at our debt service coverage ratio, things are looking good. We're at 2.76 times. And one of the things is I think we've talked a lot about sales tax numbers, but we had projected 2.5% increase for 2018, but as of today, through the last 7 months, we're a lot stronger at 4.5%. So that's why debt service coverage ratio has gone up since the last time that we met. I think it was 2.72, now it's 2.76. But one of the things that you had asked us to do when we prepared, and it's actually in the report this time, is to kind of take a look. This is for the entire program, but you wanted us to take a look at what it looks like for the major corridor program.
Yeah, this is a great slide. Thank you for.
So one of the things that, I'm just going to go forward and then come back again. So one of the things that we're looking at is doing a bond anticipation note. That's basically a short-term borrowing that we will then take out with that $537 million TIFIA loan. And we're currently working on that with our underwriters, our attorneys, and we're anticipating to take it to market in April. So at our next meeting in March, I'll give you an update as to how this is going. But based on, just wanted to show you that because this chart right here shows you the actual debt service, which is the blue lines, the TIFIA, which is the dotted line. There will be some filler in here, which is going to be the bond anticipation notes, which will be taken out by TIFIA. So currently, if you look at where we are today, we're at 1.22 times coverage. So we're at 22% of revenues above where our debt service is. But when we do take out the bond anticipation notes, we could be at 1.05, which is fairly low. But this is something that we planned for, something that we've anticipated. We knew that in 2019 and 2020 is when the height of the mid-coast expenditure is going to happen. So it's something that we've planned for. We're confident in our sales tax coming in. If for some reason there's a recession in the next couple of years, which we don't forecast, we do have fund balance that we can dip into. So the good news is that the bond anticipation notes will be around the 175 range, which is about 100 basis points lower than what the TIFIA loan is. So we'll use that for a short-term basis and then take it out with the TIFIA loan. So things are kind of working according to our plan. I guess one of the things that we're discussing right now with our financial advisors is the dollar amount to issue on the bond anticipation notes. Ultimately, we are going to issue $537 million. As we see with rates going up, it may be beneficial for us to borrow a bigger chunk today than what our plan of finance shows. And we actually, based on the spend down requirements, if interest rates go up, and we've taken out a certain amount of 175, if interest rates go above that, we could actually make money and we could keep the difference. If we hit certain spend down requirements, we don't have to rebate it back to the IRS. So those are the kind of things we're looking at right now. And when we come back in March, we'll have a better idea based on where interest rates are, how much we will issue in April.
Okay, this chart, the top line is the sales revenue forecast.
Correct.
That's a 100% of the sales revenue forecast.
Just for
No,
the
that's
major
just for the
corridor.
major corridor.
Just for the major corridor.
That is just major corridor.
Just major
Just the
corridor.
major corridor.
When does it hit the 1-to-1 that you guys can't fund any more new projects?
We don't expect to get as low as that. We expect to maybe get 105, and that's actually in year 2020 right here.
But there's a change in the way you guys,
Right.
when does that happen?
Right, so we're transitioning to a pay-go.
Yes.
What?
Pay-go, pay-as-you-go.
Pay as you go.
So essentially what that means is that we stop borrowing. We stop
Okay,
borrowing.
we stop borrowing.
Right, and so the amount of work that we do, the number of projects that we work on is largely dependent on the amount of money that we do have, you know, on a year-to-year basis. And that would come from not just Transnet, but, you know, our state and federal formula funds as well as competitive grants. So that's essentially, you know, coming back to your question, so that's essentially happening after the last of the debt is issued, which would be, what, the next couple of years, 2-3 years? So after that is when we transition. And the main reason is that you can see how the line is fairly close in 2026.
Mhm.
So the coverage is going to remain fairly tight, you know, for a number of years. And so it doesn't mean that we're never going to borrow anymore. We could borrow again, say, you know, in 2030, for example, because the capacity builds up. But it would have to be shorter term debt because Transnet only goes to 2048. We wouldn't be able to borrow, say, for, you know, a 30-year, you know, period. So then, you know, the shorter the time frame, the more you have to pay on an annual basis, right? That's like a
But the lower the rate
15-year.
typically.
Yeah, it would be. So at least for the next 10 years is what we foresee that we're just going to have to go into pay-as-you-go approach. Beyond that, yeah, there's maybe a little bit of flexibility to borrow more money, but you know, it's something that would be, you know, evaluated at that time.
I'm sorry, simple question. Right now, we have a 2.76 debt coverage ratio. And now, how are you, what did you say where it's going to happen in 2000?
Okay,
What they're really at is
so the
1 to 1.
2.76 is based on the entire Transnet, all of Transnet.
That's the con job on the bondholder.
I still don't understand what
Do you
you
want to
said.
go back to that other
This
slide?
is a portion of the sales revenue.
Oh, that's just.
This is just major corridors.
Major
Corridors only.
50% of the sale of the revenue.
38%.
Okay, so the 2.76, this is, the blue bars are the debt service, right?
Okay, $1 go, okay, that's, I understand that.
Okay.
So we're at 2.76.
And the green line assumes that Transnet, the entire collection of Transnet will remain constant, right? Obviously, we think it's going to go up, but, you know, for this purpose, we just assume that it would remain constant. And so the green line is 2.76 times what the blue bars are. But this
Okay.
is the entire amount of Transnet.
All right, but major corridors.
The other slide, you know, you remember that major corridors is 38% of the net revenues.
Oh.
Okay. And because most of the borrowing is to support that 38% bucket, we also look at the ability of that 38% bucket to pay back the debt.
So 38, okay, so the 1.05 is when you talk about 38%.
Yes. Yes.
But is that according to the bond measure, or is that our choice? The bond measure didn't limit us to.
Well, no, it's essentially, you know, the board, you know, 10 years ago essentially said we want to have an early action program where we accelerate
Which I
projects.
happen to agree with, I'm sorry.
Yes. It's a philosophical discussion. Yes.
This way I get to drive on the freeways rather than my kids, my grandchildren. Okay. All right, but this was a board decision.
Yes.
And they could always adjust that 38% if they wanted.
Well, so now you're getting into the ability of the board to, you know, change the formula distribution of the Transnet program.
Of the Transnet.
Yes, I mean, so the board, within certain limitations, does have the flexibility, requires a 2/3 vote.
We're still at 2.76 though,
For
as of now.
assuming the entire Transnet, yes.
That's the only the bondholder group.
Yes. Well, I worry about it.
The other chart, to put back, is the critical one. And that goes to my point, and it's obviously the blue is pretty, those are fixed numbers because we're going to fix debt, but the black is a variable, could be higher, could be lower. We don't know what the future holds. But every time I go home, my grandkid is talking to me about this chart. And he's really ticked off. He's 2 years old. He's really about when he's paying taxes, only half of it is going to build product for him. And I submit that you've heard this before, but your successors will hear this real loud and clear, because 20 years from now, the demands for autonomous cars and everything are going to be completely different than what we spend the money on today. So Jonathan can ride on the freeways. And the simple fact is, when we spend money today to expand the freeways, everybody recognizes it's a very short period of time before that added capacity is consumed. You build it, and they will come and consume it. So by the time the grandkid's ready to drive, there's no additional relief, the congestion for him. It's already happened.
They'll have to stay on local roads.
Pardon me?
They'll have to stay on local roads.
They'll use the senior mini grant program. You will,
No,
because
they'll
there's
just
plenty
live
of
in
money for
Coronado.
that.
I will call that senior mini grant to get me down here to protest.
But if we were going on a pay-as-you-go from the very beginning, then the way prices are going up, you'll have a hard time paying for it.
That's true. But there still won't be anything new for the autonomous cars and everything else. You've heard that before. No one's interested other than my grandkids.
If their forecast is correct, they'll have some buffer.
50 cents for every dollar.
Well, it's a digression from this, but interestingly, at the board retreat on Thursday, there was sort of a futurist kind of guy. Would you call him a futurist? And he talked about all these issues of uncertainty. And unless this is like a total setup, he sort of said that the best you can do in an uncertain environment with technology and the lack of predictability is the managed lane probably offers the greatest flexibility. Is one of the things I took away from it.
The managed lane?
The managed lane, yeah, building more managed lane capacity.
His future.
Because that's a place where autonomous vehicles, you know that you can run any kinds of forms of autonomous vehicles through those managed lanes, which is an interesting conclusion.
I'm worried about flying cars. The need for refueling stations all the way to the private sector can't do it.
So you guys have a 12:30 meeting?
Yeah.
We have Catherine Rhodes. Want to comment on this item?
Yes, this is something that I have brought up to the Sandag Executive Committee about 2 years ago, and they were supposed to get back to me. And what that is to see if San Diego International Airport is really a grandfathered airport. And if Sandag would be able to use the money from the airport for Sandag projects, specifically for transit, especially transit to the airport. So right now, we still have only 1% transit to the airport, even though in the documents that the airport puts out, they say they have 7 to 14%. So they're just kind of throwing that number out without any actual data compared to what the reality is. And so, there's 12 grandfathered airports in the United States, including Baltimore, Washington, Boston, New York, New Jersey, St. Louis, Hawaii, Denver, Chicago, San Francisco, San Diego, and a few others. And what that means is that we were grandfathered in because we were on port tidelands. And so the way that, let's say, the World Trade Center was built and basically their transportation was built, all over these other cities, is that they use airport revenue for transit. And so what Sandag staff was supposed to come back with is, am I correct or I'm not correct? Are we a grandfathered airport? Would we be able to use that money outside of the airport? And what I'm saying is, yes, you can. This is another source of funding. For example, right now, the law says you can't really use airport revenue unless you're grandfathered. And so this is billions of dollars that could be used for transportation in San Diego. So much money available. And so what I'm still waiting for is for Sandag staff to maybe go to the state attorney general and confirm if we are a grandfathered airport. And for example, let's just say there's no money for the intermodal terminal center that we were supposed to get. But a solution for that would be for the port to be able to annex some land from the airport, and then you could fund it. there's so many solutions that you can have to fund like the intermodal terminal center or transportation to the airport. That's not being looked at right now because the airport's trying to say it's not allowed.
I believe this is a Sandag issue, not an ICON issue. We only have cognizance over the Transnet
I just wanted to make you aware that there's so many opportunities to get money sitting there so instead of having just a world-class airport, we have a world-class transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
While Ms. Rose is still here, could somebody address the question of what is the policy actually in terms of uploading the audio for meetings?
I'm surprised about that, because usually we have the audio uploaded the week right after. I mean, we have to do a few manipulations to put names on the voices.
So the goal is to have it same day, is that?
Not the same day, because we still have to verify that everyone speaks.
It's typically
Stewart
done.
Elmer speaks, and so it's usually the week, the following week.
Yeah.
Got it. First trying to remind me that I'm going to shut up, Mark.
Are these guys finished, Mr. Chair?
Yes, they were done. Thank you both.
And thank you both.
Where are we going? In the boardroom. We actually,
We are interviewing the auditor. Do we have to, we just adjourn, correct?
Your subcommittee meeting.
We are adjourned. Don't forget, next meeting is March 15th.
March 14th.